Hello, folks. It's your buddy Mike Messier, One Pro Wrestling and Sports Fan YouTube channel. I want to thank my special guest, author, wrestling manager, Nikita Breznikov. Nikita, how are you tonight?
I'm so happy to be here, Mikey. Thank you for having me.
We do have a live audience, folks. This is January 26, 2025. I have got a couple of great guys here watching. Lawrence Laza Johnson, Adam, these are longtime viewers of this channel. They have tuned in especially for you, Nikita. Laza's is all the way in Australia. Adam's here in Florida, and I'm sure there's a few more. But guys, feel free to share this link in live time and even in post time. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be live to enjoy the fun, right, Nikita?
I recognize the names. That's great. Good to see you guys. I don't see you, but you're there. That's wonderful.
I want to get to the book, and there's so much to dive into. And this is Nikita's book. And just my first question off the bat, um, when we say Nikita Breznikov with Scott Teal, now Scott is a very well respected wrestling historian in his own right. I believe, I don't want to misrepresent him, but I believe Scott Teal has published with Crowbar Press and probably on his own
Yes.
many wrestling
Yes.
books.
He
When we
owns the
say
company.
he owns the company, okay, good.
Yes.
So when we say with Scott Teal, what exactly? And just as a writer's perspective, I'm also curious, what does that imply?
Scott explained that one time on the air. He said, now it's Akita's book. Please understand that. He said, but he fine tuned it because he said, Nikita, you write like a cop. I said, I do, after 27 years, sure. So he took the information. We worked together for at least a good year. We never had a crossword. He kept it as I wanted it to be, the emotion and putting forth what we, and I say we because people notice if you follow me, I put it in capital letters. We as fans, what we encountered, it meant something to, and we still talk about it. 50 years later, these things are important, and it's like, and I respect everybody that's out there that risked their life and limb in the ring, but it's like they won't be talking about this stuff in 50 years that's happening today.
Well, I want to, we don't have to debate that too much, but I do think that these days people, some 12-year-old kid now who watched Roman Reigns be champion since he was 8 years old and watched Cody defeat him, that might leave an impression, 20, 30, 40, who knows? I mean,
Good.
I think,
I'm
I
hope
think,
so. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think part of it, Nikita, and I've, as Adam knows, as Laza knows, I still go to NXT shows. I still check in with wrestling. I'm still a wrestling fan. I'm wearing a Hulk Hogan T-shirt now. I drew the illustration to this. You can get this shirt on MikeMessier.com shop. So
Very good.
I'm still a believer in pro wrestling, Nikita. But I do feel that at some point, as we get older, it's not meant for us anymore, and that's okay. And but I want to talk about when it was like myself as a teenager in my 20s, like you, this meant a lot. And growing up pretty much in the same area, which is really why you and I have done podcasts together before. Credit to when the show was called Wrestling with the Future. Angela DeCipio brought us together initially 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I actually was like basically half a step behind you because you were going to basically the same venues I was going to, the Baltimore Civic Center / the Baltimore Arena,
Mm.
and the Capitol Center, which I'm still pissed off that they blew the thing to smithereens in Landover, Maryland. To me,
Mm.
that's a tragedy like Pearl Harbor, because the Capitol Center was such an awesome venue for not only pro wrestling but for the Washington Bullets and for the Washington Capitals and for the Georgetown Hoyas, and the fact
Yes.
that this wonderful destination for sports, for business purposes, I guess. But anyway, let's talk about when you first got hooked, and all this stuff is in the book. And what I want to put over the book here is, folks, this book, like me, if you're half a step behind Nikita when it comes to being a pro wrestling fan, or even if you're a modern day fan and you've heard of Bruno Sammartino, you've heard of Bob Backlund, you've heard of Superstar Graham, or even if you've heard of Dusty Rhodes and Cody Rhodes talks about his father going to the Northeast, all of those things are chronicled in great detail in the book. And for me, Nikita, reading your book over 2024, basically, I would take it with me as I went out. I was working on my own novel at the time, and basically for relaxation, after a day of editing my own novel, Fight or Play Basketball, I would go to Whataburger or a coffee house, and I would get through a chapter or so. Actually, sometimes it took me longer because the chapters are very long, because basically each year of the 70s is a chapter. And we're not talking 2 or 3 pages. We're talking each chapter is 30, 40 pages. And you're talking about like a week-to-week breakdown of what Captain Lou Albano's up to, who Tony Gurria is tag teaming with, has Ivan Putski gained 5 pounds of muscle. And my question for you, going through the book, is, did you write notes at the time as a young fan, or was this all memory, or how did all these nuances and details and reflections, how the heck did you remember this stuff, or what did you do?
Well, it's a combination. Now, the live events, I didn't write notes, but it's here and it's here in my heart and brain, because the only thing I did, I would, before videotape, and it was very expensive, when the first machines were coming out, like 75, 76. I couldn't afford those things. They were Betamax too. So I would record on television with the microphone, just the audio. And I did it like myself. I would just say, here are the results from tonight's Baltimore Civic Center. I would have the promos, and then I would add that in. But that's it. Just what I remember. Now, I have an extensive collection of 3,000 matches that I referenced. And that's why when people say, how long did it take you? It's 10 years. You know why? Because it took me 2 years to put it together. And then it took another 6 years to find somebody, because Scott Teal originally said, Nikita, we don't need another This Day in History book. I said, Scott, it's not like that. Please take a look. It took me a long time to get him to finally say, all right, let me see it. And then he was like, we have to do this. This is just, he said, I've never approached it or seen it approached, any kind of wrestling coverage from this angle. It's not a match by match result type book, but it does cover, just as Mike said, it's a flow. If you just want to go to 1974, boom, you go to 1974 and you can read about that year. Or if you start from beginning to end, bang. Now, see, it gets more extensive in 77 through 79 because I got deeper into it. So I was able to elaborate a lot more. And it covers my life as well. I entered the police academy in 1979, and it was like, it was so surreal. And life is such a weird ride. But the shooting range where we used to qualify was at a place called Gunpowder State Park.
This is as a police officer.
Yes, retired Baltimore City Police Detective Sergeant. So, or on the way up Harford Road, and you made a left on Gunpowder Road, Nikolai Volkoff's house was another half a mile away. I had no idea at that time, but I'm cussing the son of a bitch because he attacked Bruno, because they repackaged him in 79. And then years later, when I become his manager, it's like, I'll be damned. How many times did I come this way? Because Nikolai used to say, yeah, I will go hear shooting, from the range, because it's sound travel. It's like, man, that's just wild. Unbelievable. My mother, she crazy as she used to be, but she said it's a small world. And she was right about that.
Let's get into your friendship with Nikita in a moment. I want to show some still photographs from Nikita Breznikoff's life. I put that together tonight because I wanted to make this as a special occasion, a special interview, and later on I'll have some quotes from the books, from your book, in a graphic as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, and Nikita, just so everyone does know, it's not just a professional wrestling fan as a lifetime. This police officer, he is a professional actor, and all types of things. But tonight we're going to specifically talk about the book. But you were just getting to, and this could take up a whole other show. But your friendship with Nikolai Volkoff basically led you to become a professional wrestling manager. And and this is kind of one of those things where it's like the best of nights, the worst of nights. You are on camera. You were a part of it, and I got to ask you about it. The Heroes of Wrestling, the pay-per-view. Where was that? In Biloxi, Mississippi? Was that right?
Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. And it's 25-year anniversary last year, October.
You're going to have a reunion of the reunion, right?
Yes. Well, there was some talk about certain things, and I have to leave it at that. But, what? That's the greatest credit you could say. Oh, it was the worst pay-per-view in history, which we know it wasn't.
Right.
But that's okay. I'll take that tag because, like a lot of actors have said through the years, hey, at least they're talking about you. That's great. There's no such thing as bad publicity unless you're like doing something horrible with children or something ugly like that. But hey, if you think the performance was shit, well, so what? That's fine. That's your opinion. But you have to realize with that the age of the performers. And
let me just jump in because in case people don't know, Nikita, because we kind of jumped right into it. For those that don't know about this thing, Heroes of Wrestling was October of 1999, I believe.
October 10th, yes, 99.
October 10th, 1999. It was a pay-per-view. It was available to many people, in the United States at least, on pay-per-view. And basically, Nikita managed, I believe, Nikolai Volkoff and the Iron Sheik against Butch Miller and the Sheepherders, Luke Williams. They didn't get to use the Bushwhackers name or the Sheepherders name. I think they call them the Boys from Down Under or something like that.
Thank you for that. The Sheepherders, because those guys were hardcore before ECW or anybody else. They had their lives on the line in Puerto Rico, and a lot of those barbed wire matches with Carlos Colon and all the people down there. And it's like, those bastards are tough. They made a joke and cartoon out of it, but they made money with it. So they said, what the hell are we going to do? We'll be the Bushwhackers.
Right. Okay. So people remember this from the Bushwhackers in the WWF in the late 80s. I think they got there in December of 88 and were there for quite some time. But, I mean, Nikita and I, probably Laza and Adam, I remember the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers in barbed wire cage matches against the Sheepherders in Mid-South. I remember the Sheepherders, like you said, in Puerto Rico, in Central States Wrestling. I mean, they were guys, and there's a whole lineage to those guys with Jonathan Boyd and everybody else. But you were managing their opponents, Nikolai and Iron Sheik. I mean, the guys, the first tag team to win a championship at any WrestleMania, defeating Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo at WrestleMania 1. So you are with, some top guys. And I will defend this pay-per-view, Heroes of Wrestling, just a little bit in saying I think it had the best of intentions. And I think the concept was really spot on. It was like a celebration of the previous era as we were kind of in the halfway point of what they call now the Attitude Era. It was a really good time to do this thing, but a couple of things snake bit it. Gordon Soley was originally supposed to be the lead commentator. Unfortunately, Gordon fell sick, and he was replaced by a guy who wasn't even a wrestling fan. I mean, if they had known me, or I think they could have put you in that spot.
Randy Rosenblum. He was a college basketball and football announcer. He tried. Now they threw Dutch Mantell in there to do the color to kind of help lead him through, but he was kind of rough. And Lou Albano was the commissioner. See, this was supposed to be an ongoing thing, but the man that put it all together, he was a lawyer from Washington. He said, "Please, I don't want to," because they were doing the X with the crotch WWE at the F at the time, and suck it and all. He's like, I don't want any of that. I just want you to be who you were. We're just going to go back in time a little bit. It was like somebody described it very good. A Baltimore news anchor named Marty Bass. We did a promo for it, and he said it's like a seniors tour for wrestling. It's like perfect. That's exactly what you want to hear. That's it. These guys are not in their prime anymore. And they came, they gave. But when Jake the Snake did what he did, with putting the snake between his legs and looked like he's stroking himself, it was like, oh no, that was it. Mike Stone, I believe, was his name. He said, that's it. Plus, then the pay-per-views were stolen. You know, not stolen, I shouldn't say, but like pirated. People didn't pay.
People used to have something, the black boxes, basically. Like every kid had an uncle who had one, or in my case, it was my buddies. It was always my friends. You know, somebody had one somewhere. And but what was that? I mean, getting away from the generalities of the production. Still, I would think, Nikita, I mean, that must have been a thrill to you. For you, I don't know if Nikolai invited you, or if you set that up, or how did that evening go?
I was at his house when the phone call came in. Mike O'Brien from Connecticut booked it. So I answered the phone, and it was like, hey, you know, what's happening? And Nikolai said, Nikolai, I want to do pay-per-view. All right, hey, tell him such and such. I said, okay, fine. So they said, you too, we want you there. I said, great, I love it. Well, you know who Fred Richards is, right? The referee.
I don't.
Okay, no. Fred Rubenstein / Fred Richards. He was there as well because he refereed the Abdul the Butcher versus One Man Gang. And I mean, it was a bloodbath, and that was fine. They had no problem. It was like, it's a little bit over the top, but okay. It's all part of wrestling. So, but Fred has been very outspoken because we did a show, it was right around that time. In fact, it was the anniversary, and we did the show. And I don't know, can I name the other station or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, Monty and the Pharaoh. We did it with them, and Fred was very much vocal about it, and he's very outspoken. He's intelligent. I mean, Fred is a bona fide lawyer. He's a smart businessman. But it was like, what it was meant to be. It didn't have a chance because Fred said, I flew back with Mike Stone because I was going to Maryland. Nikolai couldn't get on the flight. He had to wait for the next plane. So, he was not happy with Mike Stone. And then Fred said he flew back with Lou Albano, Jimmy Snuka, and let me see, one other. And it was like dead silence because they knew that was it. You can play the taps. This thing is finished. But it was going to try to be at least monthly, or at least quarterly, but it was hoping for monthly, and then it wasn't going to fly after that.
But I mean, if people want to ask about your credentials, like I said, the greatest of nights, the worst of nights, but you were part of the show. Let's put it that way. So, and I mean,
I've worked with Bruno Sammartino. He was a referee, and I was a manager. But I got clocked by Bruno Sammartino a couple of matches we worked together. So it's like, not many people walking can say that.
Let me get into going back to you as a fan. And like I said, with your life, Nikita, a lot of this stuff in the book, I think, does a nice job of it, is basically you as a fan. And then years later, you would kind of be on the, you would be a participant. And with someone like Bruno, who you and everybody else at that time idolized, Bruno Sammartino, and he was, in a good portion of your book, he was like the Babe Ruth, like the living legend as he was, but Bob Backlund was the champion. So a lot of your book is during the Backlund years. And I think that for a lot of fans today, if they think of Bob Backlund at all, they think of the crazy guy with the bow tie, naming the presidents and maybe getting that victory over Bret Hart at the Survivor Series 94. But for the fans of the mid 70s to the early to mid 80s, Bob Backlund was the deal. And the closest comparison in ring work I could give is Kurt Angle, because Bob Backlund was an NCAA wrestling champion. He wasn't quite the Olympian that Kurt Angle was, but in some type of time machine, I think, a Bob Backlund, Kurt Angle shoot wrestling match would probably be pretty damn close, to be honest with you, because Bob was a beast. And I've had the luxury of interviewing Bob Backlund. He's a real nice guy. He's up there in Connecticut. What was it like, Nikita? And Laza's got some good questions too, but let me ask you this one, and I'm going to get to Laza's questions. And thanks, Benny Scala's checked in. Adam's got some questions, I think.
Hey guys.
But I mean, even Adam's chiming in with this. Did Nikita ever receive a crossface chicken win by Bob Backlund? But during that Bob Backlund era, as you speaking for yourself and maybe speaking for the other fans, What was it like seeing Bob as champion as compared to Bruno, or seeing that whole thing develop?
Well, we understood it was different, and so did Bob Backlund. He knew he was not Bruno, and that this is once in a lifetime man, without a doubt. And he was a gorilla. He had that incredible strength, Bruno did. But you could look at him and see, especially if you see a picture of Bruno in like regular clothes, like you and I dress, like a suit and a tie. But Bob Backlund was deceptive. I can't say he was as strong as Bruno, but he was damn close. But he did not look it, especially on television. Television could not do him justice. When you saw him in the arena, it was like, all right, you see the definition in this guy. There's his power, son of a bitch. Because the first time we saw him in Baltimore was against Ken Patera, and that goes back to the 19. He was just starting to make the circuit, so he's wrestling Patera, and Patera was 300 pounds at the time. Another guy that I really love is Ken Patera with his strength and what he's done with himself. But January 7th of 78, first appearance, and he lifts Patera up for the atomic knee drop. Boom. Patera sold like crazy, out of the ring, limps back to the dressing room, and he handled Patera, and not just as the match, but you could see the strength was there, and it's like, son of a bitch, he can throw Patera around like that? That's impressive. So for us, to see Backlund, and I always hear the knock that, well, Backlund couldn't draw, or he wasn't over. And it's like, man, that's bullshit. I'm talking as a fan. I went and I look, I used to do the wheel because he did it. I still do exercise.
The exercise wheel you're talking about, the exercise.
He did it for 1 hour right by the ring. It's no bullshit. He's there doing that, the wheel. And I'm like, go to hell. I mean, I used to crank out maybe 50 of those son of a bitches and think I was patting myself on the back that was great, but he did it for an hour. Ivan Koloff used to be able to do it from a standing position and then go down and do a wheel. It was like, damn. Now here's another guy. During 9/11, just a few days after it happened, I get a phone call, and it's Ivan Koloff. He said, I know you're a policeman up there. I want to make sure you're okay. Just call me and let me know. I'm like, I can't believe this. Wow. Because we worked together through the years, and he just beautiful. Another guy, nothing like his character. A beautiful, wonderful man.
When you talk about the wheel, that's like an exercise for the core strength for the midsection, and it's rough, man. I mean,
you want to get your abdomens in shape. You do that wheel. Now, Bob Backlund used to have a small wheel that was 10 times harder. So, well, that's why he's on the cover. This is from February 19th, 1979, the 1 hour draw in Madison Square Garden. The wonderful. I'm not as much a Bill Apter fan as I am George Napolitano. George gave us this picture to use, Scott Teal and I, and 1 hour draw. And there's another guy, Greg Valentine, true wrestler. I mean, he can get it done. 1, 2, 3. You throw those two in the ring, and it's like, just sit back and let them do. Tell them to finish, and that's all you need to do. They'll handle the rest.
One thing I want to mention about your book, because you get into like crowd sizes, you get into specific matches, you get into guys getting over, and let me show right now a couple of quotes from the book. We do have some great questions here, and but let me see if we get some new questions before we move on. Benny the Playa Scala says one of the best wrestling books ever, and
Thank you,
Benny is a great guy. Benny, as some folks know, this is the new cover of my novel, Fight or Play Basketball. And
nice.
Benny, the cover is real sharp. I mean, this is a renovated cover. In 2022, I published the book. It had a black and white cover, which was fine. But I felt like in 2024, and Benny was actually a big part of this process. He wrote the foreword, but not only that, in 2022 and in 2024, Benny basically helped proofread this book, and unlike some writers, I gave Benny a shout out in the book because he did suggest a line, a Eddie Haskell reference from Leave It to Beaver. So some people would just take the Eddie Haskell reference and run with it. I actually gave Benny credit for suggesting that because I did use it. But basically, as I was reading as I was writing the rewrite to my book, I would go to Whataburger at 2:00 in the morning and I'd have your book. And that's why I'm making notes. And also I would reference some of these matches like Greg Valentine versus Bob Backlund, or there was a heel turn, I think, with Peter Maivia and Chief Jay Strongbow. And I would be watching on my phone with the headphones on. Another thing, folks, is when I go out in public and I watch stuff on my phone, I always have headset. I do not blare my phone for the masses because I think that's disrespectful to other people's sanctity. But I would listen with the headphones on YouTube, kind of reading your book while watching some of the matches on my phone. And
Cool.
so it was a good like cross-reference interactive. That's why it did take me basically a year to get through your book, because it was enjoyment reading as opposed to something else. Let me show some quotes because I do have this.
I got to give Benny a plug.
Please
From
do.
that era, he appeared as a pen pal in one of those magazines. Remember, they used to list the pen pal? Benny was in there. That's cool.
That's awesome. Let me show some quotes, folks, from Nikita's book. Okay, so what we saw was an illustration of some quotes from When It Was Real. Nikita Breznikov, the author. And Nikita, the reason why I wanted to show some of those quotes is because it is a book. And I think sometimes what happens when people listen to a podcast like this, like, oh, I heard Nikita talk about his book. Well, go out and buy the goddamn book. You know what I mean? Like, that's the whole point of these things.
Yes, please. Evan Ginsberg always says they'll spend $300 on a shirt, but they won't buy our merchandise. I mean, this is the old time. Evan is right. I love Evan. We're friends 30 years.
Yeah, When It Was Real, crowbarpress.com. My book is available on Amazon. Fight or Play Basketball. Benny? No, that kid is I should really get in touch with him, because the website Unsplash allows for free use of photographs from professional photographers. So this kid, I'm going to make him famous whether he likes it or not. But he's basically,
that's cool.
Yeah, he's illustrating the character of Jack Scratch, the lead character of my novel, who's is a high school kid who's caught between two sports that he loves, basketball that he's played his whole life, and boxing, which he just gets into. And but for me, Benny, you know, it was kind of inspiring because I'm telling you, man, I wrote that book in 2022, self-published on Amazon. In 2012, I wrote it as a screenplay. So we're talking 12 or 14 years. So the last thing I wanted to do in 2024 as I was preparing to do the audiobook version of Fight or Play Basketball, is to do yet another proofread, another rewrite. But that's exactly what I was forcing myself to do. And your book was kind of inspiring because I'm looking at your book and I know you because we've done podcasts before.
Yes.
And I'm kind of thinking, well, look at all the work that Nikita put into this book. You know, like look at the references and Captain Lou Albano and the Manager of the Year controversy and the things, the nuances. One thing that I saw in those quotes that I shared from the book, if people are just listening to the audio version of this podcast, there was a lady, I believe, was her name Mrs. Krieger? Was that how we said her name?
Georgette Krieger, yes. And she was not on the payroll. The fucking boys were lucky to get paid that were in the ring. They weren't going to pay some old lady that sat at ringside. I can cuss, right? There's no problem.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so it's like, yeah, the fucking boys had enough trouble getting paid. She was just a fan. And she lived in Baltimore City. So she was always at Baltimore. She'd be at the Capitol Center. And then she would take the train and her sister, and they would go to Madison Square Garden. And Vince would mention her on some of the broadcasts on the Madison Square Garden cable network, or at that time HBO was broadcasting it, because they didn't have the guardrail. So she would get up to the ring and she would brush the salt away from Tanaka and Fuji. And, you know, she would, in fact, Kowalski spit on her a few times in Baltimore. So they had a running feud because if you go back, it's the Executioners, and she knew who was under the mask because Walter's got that hunched shoulder. You know it's him. Yeah. And she slaps him hard. He turns around, he swings at her. You son of a bitch. And it's like, but here's a wonderful guy. First guy to ever pay me is like Killer Kowalski, who they at one time they said he used to give kids probably the all-time great villain that gave more kids nightmares than anybody. So I go up to Boston with Nikolai. He said, "You'll go work for Walter?" I said, "Yeah, meet Killer Kowalski." Shit, yeah. It was $30 to fly to Boston. Okay, so I go up there. I'm not expecting to get paid. I'm just thrilled to death working with Iron Mike Sharp. And then we worked the night before for a guy named Richard Byrne. Walter was a face that night, saved me from Iron Mike Sharp. The next day he's a heel. He beat the shit out of me. But after we were done with his show, he said, "Hey, kid, come here." I said, "Yeah, Walter, what's up?" "Here, put that in your pocket." I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, wow, I didn't expect it. First payday I ever get. Then he says, "Take care of Nikolai." I'm like, "Take care of Nikolai? What the hell?" You know, I'm new to this thing, but yeah, you know, always. But then I got to know years later what they were talking about, take care of Nikolai, because, I mean, God love him, the nicest guy there ever was, but you got to be careful because they could take advantage of it, and that was true.
Let me get to some of the questions because Adam, Laza, they're really involved in this, and Laza he's had a series of questions, but Laza, all the way from Australia, who were some of your favorite golden age performers, and did any influence your approach as a manager? Now, I think when Laza is saying golden age, I think he's referring to the mid 80s, that era, but you're more of the 70s. But basically, for your era as a fan, Nikita, you go ahead and take that question.
Oh, I can answer that easily. Fred Blassie and Lou Albano, who I got to know both through the years. But it was like you could listen to Fred Blassie, read the phone book. You know, yeah. He was just that kind of a guy, and he was Hollywood too. Burt Reynolds, everybody knows Burt Reynolds, and God rest his soul. He crawled up to him at Madison Square Garden in the dressing room and said, "Oh, great one, you finally returned." And it's like, but he had that kind of appeal that all over the place. And Lou, the crazy bastard that he was, you mentioned the Manager of the Year award, November the 8th of 77. When Lou went wild, and then what I was told to me by Johnny Valiant and different people, Lou would hit the sauce during the afternoon, and then you could tell on the promos, which were shot during the daytime earlier, he was starting to get there, but by nighttime when they were doing the promos, he was full lit, and he would cuss at Vince. That was legitimate heat between them still. That wasn't some kind of act that they put on, because there was one time where Lou was pretty well wound up, and he went over to Vince, and he took his shirt off, and he threw it at him, and then you see the shirt come flying back, and you can see Vince. He's over there talking with Bruno, and he turns his mic off, but he says, "Asshole." It's like he couldn't stand it. He called him a fucking asshole. It's like It was just, yeah, okay. He can get on your nerves, I guess, but we loved him. And he was great because he knew his role. With Lou Albano against Bruno, to go back to the Baltimore Civic Center, August 14th, 1975, that's all you got to have. Lou against anybody, and everybody else can have the night off. Of course, he comes in and he had the big X across because he wore the jacket that said Albano. I'm not going to be Italian anymore like that San Martino. I'm Lou Albin. So Bruno beat the shit out of him, and blood from the ring, like somebody got hit with a shotgun all the way to the dressing room. Because it was right before intermission, and we're like, look at this. This is not phony. Look at this. It's blood. But you loved it. And but you never pinned Lou Albano. You could never beat him. But he cut himself to shreds and run off for the high hills. That was it.
One of the things that kind of annoys me, Nikita, about modern day wrestling fans, and it's no offense to them because they're just a product of their generation, but if you ask them who the greatest manager of all time is, most fans today would say Paul Heyman. He's great. But and if they're a little bit more educated, they'll say Bobby Heenan, which is Bobby's also awesome and great. I think Lou Albano doesn't get that tip of the hat, or Fred Blassie for that matter, because for whatever reason, maybe because of his commentary work into the Nitro era, Bobby kind of went to another generation. And so people kind of, and Bobby, I'm not disrespecting Bobby Heenan by any means, but at the time, the 70s into the early 80s, it was the big three: Fred Blassie, the Grand Wizard, and Captain Lou Albano. And here's a follow-up question as we're speaking about these managers. Laza asks, as a manager, what do you think makes a heel manager truly effective in getting heat?
It's very simple. Freddie used to say, just pick out one or two people and go for them. Just pick on them, center on them, and everybody else will pick it up. They'll pick up the beat because they'll be pissed off that you're centering on these people.
In the audience.
In the audience. Make sure there's some kind of meek person. Like Baron Cicluna used to pick on a guy named Bud. I don't know Bud's last name, but he would get in line at noon for the next month's sales of the night of the show. And he wore glasses, so Cluna would get there and make the eyes, and Bud would almost burst the blood vessel, screaming and hollering. But it's easy. It was easy to get people hot back then. Now, I don't know, what the hell can you say? You'll have somebody sue you, or they'll want to shut you down or burn you down. It's like, you can't say anything. So what the hell, where does heat come from?
Benny, the Playa Scala, is going back a little bit before any of these guys. Bobby Davis, I believe he managed Nature Boy Buddy Rogers.
Buddy Rogers.
And, no offense to Bobby Davis, but I really haven't – I've seen pictures of him. I haven't seen much of his work because I think that's the time back, unfortunately for everybody, with not only pro wrestling but a lot of things that were broadcast on television. They would actually re-record over the reels, the film, because at the time nobody had a VCR. This is the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the early days of television. Unfortunately, even the original Man Walks on the Moon, that's not the footage that people saw. It's absurd when we think about it in modern eyes. But those folks back then, this stuff was expensive to film. So do you have any experience as a fan watching Bobby Davis, Nikita? Is he in your time frame? Yeah. No,
not at all. But my amigo Johnny Rods used to bicycle those tapes. He would take it down to wherever they were going to go to get distributed, or to make copies and then send them throughout the territory. Baltimore, we were 2, sometimes 3 weeks behind. So if you would see you didn't know the tag team title had changed hands, and then all of a sudden here comes the Lumberjacks with the belts. It's like, what the hell happened? When did that occur? Well, you probably see it the next week, but they did the best that they could. I think that's better. You didn't have to worry about anybody getting on their box and then putting out what an angle is, who's going to go over. I mean, how are you going to get a message out? I had a couple of contacts in New York that I would call the next day, but that was in the early 80s, because even in the 70s, if you called Boston, that long distance bill was steep, and your parents were going to get the shit out of you over that. I mean, that would be like $10, and that was a lot of money back then, especially for low-grade middle-class people. So it was like you were in the dark. There were no sheets. The best thing was Ring Magazine. Right. That was no bullshit stories, and they would give in-depth coverage. Now, you were going to get it a couple of months late, but that was really, I really enjoyed Ring because it's like, wow, you can, it's almost like my book. They would give a description of them, not just the results, but they would give you a nice description of what's happening or it happened in that match. And it's like, wow, that's fun. That's something you couldn't wait to hit the newsstand. Like when we, I guess, all comic book collectors were Marvel or DC. Me, I was Marvel, and it was like, well, you couldn't wait for them to hit the stand because that was it. That was our sex as kids, you know.
Let me jump in a little bit, Nikita, because you're describing basically the smart marks. You know, the culture of the smart mark was kind of evolving in your time period, basically going from nothing to something. And you know, as much as people crap on Dave Meltzer, he didn't get popular, or he didn't start publishing weekly or however much he published until like 81. So I think when you talk about the dirt sheets, it wasn't until like 81 that there was any dirt sheets. And
that's what I would say. 81 was the year I started to see things. Yeah.
Right. And there was another guy, Dooley, that was like Jim Cornette's buddy, like Frankie Dooley or somebody in Memphis, who actually started the 5-star system before Meltzer, but Meltzer took it and ran with it. And but before there was, you know, Mean Gene Okerlund with 1-900, you know, hotline in the WCW era, or before, I mean, when I was a kid, there was a number you could call in New York that, like you said, long distance, and I got the yelling for 1 month because I rang up that phone bill trying to win. I was living in Fairfax, Virginia, trying to win free tickets to the Nassau Coliseum, not realizing that the Nassau Coliseum was about 12 hours north of where we lived. But I rang up the phone bill 1 month for that. But there was word of mouth, and I mean, for people who are alive today, it's word of phone. You know what I mean? Like they don't,
Yes.
the phone is basically half of your brain, and it's unfortunate, but you see people in the gym, you know, like they got their neck crunched up. They're doing more phone work than they are doing exercises. But back when people used to actually have to think for themselves, you would get the information. And like you said, something like Ring Magazine, they had it lag time, because by the time they put the articles together and the photographs and it went to the publisher and it went to the printing press, by the time you get that information from Ring Magazine, or in my case Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the stuff was 2 months old, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. But you know, we didn't know what, since we didn't know what was going on in Madison Square Garden, when you see the photos, that was like, well, Putski's already wrestled Superstar. We thought we were seeing it for the first time. We didn't know Chief had wrestled him probably 15 times from when he won, like through May, June. We didn't see it till August 27th. We thought that was it because the big flyer said Chief Jay Strongbow gets long-awaited title shot. And it's like, yeah, you know, that was great. And we were lucky because Bobo Brazil got the only match with Superstar. But they were smart enough to put it in Baltimore because that was a Bobo town, which he carried in 1973 when Pedro was starting to fade and fizzle out. So Phil Zacco, being the smart promoter that he was, brought Bobo in to carry the summer, and it worked. He won against Von Erich, Fred Blassie, the whole Steele, and it was like, there you go. That's gold. Bobo will bring him in, and they did.
Good segue, because I want to get to one of Adam's questions, and you guys have so many great questions tonight. We won't get to all of them, but we will get to this one. Bret the Hitman Hart said George Steele was a real dick backstage. Said he fined Owen for being late one time. I've heard that story. And so Bret took George's briefcase and tossed it off some bridge into some river. Any George the Animal Steele stories?
Absolutely. I became good friends with him through the years. And see, now that same thing I hear about Chief all the time, who became like a father to me the last 10 years of his life, Strongbow. Everybody's, oh, he was this, he was that. It was their fucking job to make sure you got there on time, to make sure you were clean, that you were straight. That's like Pete Doherty. Chief gave him the name Duke of Dorchester because he showed up late, and Chief said, there it is. It's the Duke of Dorchester. Now we can start the show. And it stuck. But George Steele, he was a wonderful guy. And I'll tell you what, I was staying with the director, and I was in I thought George lived in East Madison, Michigan, or he was from there anyway. And so I was down the street from the school that he had taught. But I thought it was East Madison. So I called Luscious Johnny, because we were very close. And I said, John, where did George teach? and he used to call him Georgie Porgy. He said, "Well, Madison." I said, "Really?" I said, "I think I'm down the street." He said, "Yeah, that's Georgie Porgy's school. That's it." Then when I got back home, I called him. I said, "George, did you is this where you used to teach?" He said, "What street live you on?" I said, "Lawrence." "I lived on Lawrence. What 100 block?" And it was like it was 2 blocks away. He could walk to school. And they named the stadium at football stadium because he was a football coach as well as physical education coach. So, I mean, to me, he was always great. The first night I met him, it was for a Dino Sana WWWWA show. And I was thrilled because I imitate him more than anybody throughout the years around the house and things like that.
What year was this?
That was 1997. That was another October 10th, 1997, though. So I said, because you remember the match where you dislocated Rick Bolton's shoulder? And he's like, "How do you know his name?" I'm like, "George, I live this shit. Are you kidding? It's in my heart and in my brain." I made him a copy of it. I made tapes for everybody through the years, but he couldn't believe it. He said, well, he wasn't a wrestler, but it was like he could dislocate his shoulder at will. So it's like, okay, just get in there, do a little bit of bullshit for 2 minutes.
This is Rick Bolton, the preliminary guy you're talking about.
I'll put you in a flying hammerlock, and then you just sell. And it was like, but Vince and Pat Patterson helped sell it, and it was like people were ready to murder him because it looks like he killed this guy.
It looks like George Animal Steel popped the shoulder out of a prelim guy on TV, is what.
And he sold it so well, like he was maimed for life. It was. Then he got back there and just clink, he's back in place.
Right. That's a guy that earned his paycheck. I mean, that's one thing that you get into in this book is some of these, whatever you call them. Carpenters is a nice name. The derogatory term at times is jabroni or job guys, but carpenter's a good term because it's basically the guys that build the foundation of the house. And I'm telling you, man, one of the most talented guys in pro wrestling history and the WWF and Vince McMahon Jr., to his credit, Johnny Rodz was like a real early Hall of Famer. And Johnny trained, I think, wasn't Johnny Rodz the school that trained Shane Douglas and Mick Foley?
And the Dudley Boys, on and on and on. Yes. And I'll tell you what, another wonderful guy. And he still has Gleason's Gym in Brooklyn. And in fact, he and Jose Estrada are going to make an appearance pretty soon. I got to find out where. I'll let you know. You can tell people. They're going to be some of the legends there. And they should have given Rods and Estrada the belts at some point. They could have sold it. They would have been. And I like Strongbow again. He was close with Vince, very close. He wanted SD Jones and Tony Atlas to become champions. But I think Pat Patterson had Vince's ear a little bit more because he knew Rocky Johnson from the West Coast. So they pushed Atlas and Johnson. But Chief kept wanting to push SD because he said, SD, he's a hard worker. And Tony Atlas will tell you, he said, he's stronger than me. SD Jones was a powerhouse. And he's a guy that he was not what they call a jobber, but he didn't get many wins, but he'd give a hell of a match against a guy like Spiros Arion or somebody like that. And it's like, okay, well, SD is going to probably go down so they can wrestle Backlund the next month or Pedro Morales or something like that. But yeah, just great people that dedicated themselves to the wrestling itself.
And along with the Carpenters or the undercard guys, whatever we want to reference them. And I agree, because I remember when SD Jones used to win some matches. And in fact, in the Capitol Center, believe it or not, SD Jones more than once was in a main event match. One time it was with Rocky Johnson against Playboy Buddy Rose and Ray the Crippler Stevens. That was the main event of the show. And another time it was actually all three gentlemen that you mentioned, Rocky Johnson, Tony Atlas, and SD Jones against all three Samoans when they brought in, I think it was Sika had a son named Samala. They called him Samoan number 3 or Samu. And Samu would hang around for quite a while because then he would team up with Rikishi and the Samoan SWAT team basically half a decade later. The Carpenters, the job guys, whatever we want to call them, the undercard talent, Guys that I would kind of put in that same category is this question from Adam. Who are some of Nikita's favorite WWF or WWWF referees? And any Joey Morella stories. Joey Morella was the son of Gorilla Monsoon. Joey, probably most notably, was the referee for Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3. But any favorite WWF referees of your era, Nikita, as a fan?
Oh, absolutely. Dick Worley. I mean, became friends with him. He was a boxer, and he actually was training Nikolai back in 1977 to become a boxer. If you ever go back and look at some of the matches, Nikolai trimmed down to about 290 pounds. And you could see he was looking lean because he was trying to be a boxer. And because Dick Worley said, I tried like hell to get it, to get him sad. And he said, of course he had the power. But like Nikolai would show me later, he said, you think like a pitcher, you're going to rear back. He said, no, you just throw that jab and you're going to bust the bag that way, and you'll hit it harder. But Nikolai was like Herman Munster. They would whisper a story in his ear and he wouldn't kill the guy then, like that Herman Munster when he was a wrestler. Herman the Great, that was, I love it. The wife's going to kill me, but I love Herman. And I say Nikolai is a real life Herman. He was nice like that, but he could also rip the door off the hinges by not meeting it and just say, oh, sorry about that. There was more referees now and Billy Caputo in Madison Square Garden. Billy was a great referee, somebody I really like. But with Joey Morella, he came around it was like 83 is when he started. He was really skinny because he would get banged around. Dick Worley was in good shape. Wasn't big. Dick was probably about 190 pounds, maybe. But he was muscular. But Joey Morella was like a beanpole. He was adopted, Monsoon's adopted son. And Nikolai was and Chief. They were all close with Monsoon. He was a great guy. And I had met him as a fan many times outside of the arenas because Monsoon, he was a part of the company. See, I actually worked for a bond company as a young man. Then I saw the bonds come through for Capital Wrestling Corporation. Vince Sr., Phil Zacco, Skolin, Monsoon, they were all officers at Capital Wrestling Corporation. Because when Superstar got hurt in a match with Dusty Rhodes in the Garden back on September 26th of 77, he got a staph infection after he had like a brush with his elbow, his knee, whatever. He got hurt because they said elbow, but he said knee, so I don't know which it was. But he was out of commission for a good 4 weeks. So it's like, what the fuck, man? The champion's on the shelf. What do we do? So he missed October 1st against Putski, and Baltimore was a Putski town. So they brought in Waldo Von Erich, who was not in the area at the time, but they were able to get a hold of Waldo. He came in. They didn't announce it until you were sitting in the chairs.
So,
and then
people have bought tickets to see Superstar Graham defend the title, the world title against Ivan Putski.
Yes, and they don't say he's not there until the ring announcer and the lights go out, and it's like people were like, ah. And then when they said Waldo Von Erich was like, well, okay. But they said the next month that Superstar was injured. And he came in, he was wearing this big ace bandage wrapped around his arm. And it was like, okay, yeah, whatever. It didn't really matter, but it was really neat in Boston. Putski, because they kept it going a little bit, because believe it or not, Bruno did not make a match in Boston against Soup. First time, October 10th, Superstar couldn't make it. November 7th, Bruno didn't make it, which was very rare. But when Putski hits Superstar with the hammer, he goes out of the ring, and the ace bandage just dangles over the top rope. You couldn't have done that in 100 takes if you were shooting a movie. It was like, that's just one of them wild moments. That was great.
I think it's interesting that we talk about wrestling has changed so much. So these days, I mean, the closest thing I can think of in any type of comparison to that story of basically the champion Superstar Graham, because of a legitimate injury, cannot wrestle. I mean, even in a predetermined contest, they don't want to put him out there and just have some goofy count out after a minute. They want to give the fans a real match. It's not even safe for Superstar to go out there and do a body slam or whatever. So they put in a substitute, and instead of just kind of, promoting someone else from the mid card, like a High Chief Peter Maivia or someone that the fans in the Northeast would be familiar with, they basically kind of punt and they bring in someone who I don't even think was from the area, Waldo Von Erich.
At that time, he was gone for a long time, at least
right.
a year.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. The closest thing I can think of is about 6 or 7 years ago, the WWE had a pay-per-view or a monthly special premium live event on the WWE Network. It was supposed to be the Shield, Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, and Roman Reigns, and Roman was legitimately hurt or dealing with his blood cancer situation. They actually announced on the WWE, platform, their website or something, that they had to pull Roman Reigns, and they replaced him with Kurt Angle. And Kurt Angle had been a figurehead, Raw general manager and hadn't wrestled a WWE match in 12 years. And
wow.
Maybe, yeah, I think that's the case. They put him in there, and it was fun because you had Kurt Angle is kind of like the father, age-wise. He could be the father of Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins, and he's in there, and all these guys that they were fighting were selling for him like crazy. And the substitution thing is fun when they do it the right way. And your book goes into a lot of these things that would happen at house shows, that because the business evolved from a house show business, they didn't have pay-per-view. They didn't have Clash of Champions. Last night there was a Saturday night's main event on NBC, which was a 2-hour special, which some really good matches. But the point is, the business, the TV, the weekly syndicated 1 hour of television used to promote the house show, meaning the reason you're watching this at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning is to get the fans to actually pay $20, $10, $5 to buy a ticket and to go to the arena and buy a hot dog. And that's how these people made money. It wasn't about $1 billion television deal. And like I said, it's just different. I wouldn't say it's better or worse. I think the live show experience was probably better back then, because when you say when it was real, there's a big difference, Nikita, and for everybody else, this. There's a difference between I'm going to push the button on my TV and watch something at home where I have my, my restroom and I have my kitchen and I can put my shoes on or take them off or do whatever I want. There's a big difference between that type of commitment versus I'm going to buy a ticket in advance. I'm going to drive an hour, 2 hours, 90 minutes. I'm going to park. Maybe there's free parking. Maybe I have to park in the street. Maybe I have to go to some scary city in the middle of the night. And I'm going to go into this venue for 3.5 hours and watch this stuff. The level of commitment that the fans had to make, that they happily made. And you talk about some of the times when you're a young guy and you're trying to date girls and you're trying to get a ride from your friends to go to these shows. It's just a different type of thing. And the word that I think is missing from some of the wrestling today is mystique. They've killed the mystique. I mean, things like I watched the show, but Tough Enough, I don't think Tough Enough gets enough credit / blame for destroying kayfabe, because something like Tough Enough, the show with Al Snow and Taz back in the early 2000s, it showed you too much. And anyway, I've gone on a rant long enough, but jump in there, Nidia.
What was really great was if you were there live, the sound, it was like a thunderstorm when they would hit that mat, and the color. See, they were smart. I learned this from movies. Lighting is so important. So they killed the house lights and they turned on the ring lights. It's like, man, did that bring out the color? And then there you are watching them, the infomercials, basically what the TV show was weekly, 45 maybe 50 minutes, you were lucky. And it's like, there they are right before you. The first night I went, November 28th, 1973, just a couple of nights before Pedro lost, I couldn't go by myself. It was not a good section of the city at the time, especially for a younger kid. So I went with my best friend's father. He agreed to take us. And it was a battle royal. And here they all come to the ring. And I described it. It looked like an army marching into battle, but it's like, there they all are. There's Chief. Andre's first appearance, and he's standing above everyone like, there's the Giant. There's that fucking Tanaka and Food and Mike McCourt. I mean, it was orgasmic. It really was. You could have probably had 5 naked women walk out there. We'd say, "Get the fuck out of the way. We're watching wrestling." You know, it's like it was. And then if you had blood, with that lighting, I described it recently in an article I did for a magazine that'll be coming out. I said, if people like hoity-toity type saw us in the arena being orgasmic over somebody bleeding, especially if they had done that to the face the month before, and now this month they're getting their shit back, they'd say these people need to be committed because they're either demonically possessed or there's something wrong with them that they shouldn't be allowed in society. But it meant that much. It was great.
Nikita, read this question from Laza, and I'm going to read a quote from your book. Read that to yourself, and then we'll answer the question.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
But let me read this quote from page 106 of When It Was Real. This is in 1977. We loved wrestling so much. I hear people talk about wrestling being cyclical, but I don't really believe that held true in those days. We would buy tickets for the next month's show that very night with no knowledge whatsoever of what the lineup would be or who would be on the card. Most of us didn't care who was wrestling. We just wanted to be there because we loved them all.
Yes, absolutely correct. And that guy, Bud, I told you about, he would get in line at noon. And Bud was cool because he would buy tickets for you, too. I mean, if you were going to get the ringside tickets, and they were only $4, it wasn't that expensive. He could say, give me the money, or I'll get it from you later. Because there was no race, religion, anything. When you walk through those doors, all the shit of the world was left outside. We were all a family together watching the wrestling. That was what you were there for. So Bud would trust you, and he would get the tickets. And I became that way too over the years. I mean, I didn't always get to see Bud, but I would buy my tickets the month before. And no, I had no idea who was going to be. They wouldn't announce it till almost the end of the card. But you knew it was going to be great, and you wanted to get the best work. Now, as far as the actor versus manager, there's no difference because the greatest actors in the world are professional wrestlers. I mean, people say, "Oh, Strongbow was Italian." Okay, he was Italian. So what? But his mother was an Indian too. His mother was Cherokee. But Nikolai used to explain this best. If you don't believe it, how the fuck you expect people to believe it? You must believe it first. And it's like, he's right. Absolutely. And when you go to act, that's why I say acting is not fucking hard. They say, "Oh my God, it's so hard." It's like, bullshit. You get the fucking standard. Like, I'm being centered in your camera right now and mutter a couple lines in the dark and say, wait. Now say it like this. It's like they fucking lead you through. You got to know the lines, but they lead you through. Because I argued one time on a movie set with a big theater gal from Los Angeles. And because she said, "Well, Nikita, what's your experience with the theater?" And I said, "Professional wrestling." She said, "That's not theater. What the hell's that got to do?" She was a big Tennessee Williams fan. Right. And I said, "Sweetie, we got a one-take Jake. That's it. We can't fuck it up. And we don't get to speak. People can't usually hear us. We're basically pantomiming and acting out and getting the crowd's attention that way. You can't tell me that's not theater." So she said, "Well, we'll just agree to disagree." I said, "Yeah, okay, whatever. What am I going to say?"
And that's one thing I got to say, is that, back when I was a younger fan, there was pro wrestling, and being a pro wrestling fan was really like, you're in isolation land. You know what I mean? Like, until you had that monthly gathering of the tribe at the arena, you didn't have, Peacock Network, promoting Cody Rhodes, and you couldn't go in to any store and just wear it. Like these days, I'm wearing NWO t-shirts a lot, and people are having conversations with me about that era. But way back when, it was like you had you were a redheaded stepchild 24 hours a day if you were a wrestling fan, right?
And you're right, because when I worked for that bond company, when I was back 17, I would see people there. I'm like, "Hey, there's so-and-so." But they would never admit that they were there because, wrestling, don't let anybody know. Is that they're right? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? What's wrong with this? So what? It's great, man. I mean, like roller derby, I never understood it. Watched it, but it was like, I don't know. And that was supposed to be sexy. But I don't know how the hell they can look sexy wearing those hats and all that other shit. But like the female wrestling, like Mickey Williams, oh, that was my heart for it. And Casey, I got to become Dan over the years, and she'd say, Nikita, she always enjoyed that when I do my Facebook post, elaborate about the women.
Yeah.
All the women put in, because one night, and it was just a couple of nights ago, it was the anniversary, they had more women on the card than they had men. And that was in 72. Philadelphia picked it up, but then they didn't appear in the Garden until July 1st of 72. It's like, what bullshit? You can't stop thinking about it. What the hell? But then, like Ann Casey said, we always wore a one-piece bathing suit. We didn't look like we were going to be strippers, like they do today. And Ann said, I respect them. They give up the body like we did, but we wore a one-piece. But that was all supposed to be like, oh my God, women are wrestling. That's supposed to draw you in.
Yeah. I want to get to this question because it's a good one from Laza. Nikita, if you don't mind, if you could check that your computer's plugged in, because I was having a little bit of trouble with your audio, and I don't know if maybe your computer battery is dying a little bit or something.
No, I'm plugged in. I'm
plugged in? Okay, good.
Yeah. I heard that. Had me moving around, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
See, that's the Italian. I can't sit still.
Got to get the headset, buddy. Come on. Laza says, what advice would you give to aspiring wrestlers, managers, or entertainers looking to make a name for themselves? And I'll jump in on Laza's behalf, because Laza's over there in Australia, and Laza has gone on this quest. I mean, he's done cameos with me, Raven, all types of Kevin Sullivan, the late great Kevin Sullivan, and Laza's really looking for advice. And the best advice I've given to Laza, which I think is solid advice, is if you really want to get in the pro wrestling business, you might have to come over to the United States and go to Booker T's wrestling school in Houston. And I don't know if Booker T and his wife Sharmell Sullivan, I don't know if they train commentators or people, but Laza doesn't necessarily want to be a wrestler, from my understanding. He basically wants to be a booker. And I'm kind of stumped, because I've tried to help Laza the best I can, but I think one thing I keep saying to him is, I don't know if Australia is the place to be. There's only one promoter there of note, and he's kind of hard to get a hold of. Do you have any advice for Laza, Nikita?
Well, if you were in the United States, I would definitely say there's a lot of people we can put you in touch with. But Australia, I've got no clue. And the only thing I can say is stick with it. Let me make sure I'm not something wrong here, because I'm sitting still. Just stick with it. Keep your ears and eyes and ears open, and when you get an opportunity, just keep your mouth shut, do what you're told, and then let it. Hey, I have an idea.
Sure.
Give me 1 second.
All right, folks, it's your buddy Mike Messier. I'm here with Nikita Breznikov. Nikita's going to look for.
I know what it is. It's
sure.
A heater blowing, I think.
Okay.
I think it was a heater blowing. Okay, so the keep your eyes and ears open, and you can definitely just when an opportunity comes, just do what you need to do, and you'll get through it. And just listen. Sometimes it seems like they're taking advantage of you. They are, but they do that in acting too. They say you're an intern. It's like, what the fuck is an intern? You come to work, you're supposed to get paid. How in hell is that legal in the United States? But they do it.
Adam is thinking that it's my fault.
Yeah, because I turned this off and it didn't stop. Hang on.
So I appreciate the heads up, Adam. Adam thinks it might be actually my mic being too close to my nose, which is causing.
Oh, you're breathing. That's it. He's right.
All right, so let's see if this helps. Thanks, Adam. We have a very attuned. Very attuned audience here, which I appreciate. Adam was nice enough okay, well now, hey, I got to breathe too, buddy. Talk about Chief Jay Strongwell putting that sleeper hold on people. I mean, that's something. We're talking about mystique. Chief Jay in the sleeper hold would put that on guys, and the referee used to drop the hand down 3 times. So, I mean, like I said, things in wrestling change. A lot of things stay the same, but one thing that did change is before the tap out. I mean, I think the tap out basically got adapted from UFC, and guys like Taz with the Taz mission in the mid-90s, and then Kurt Angle really with the ankle lock, and Ken Shamrock even before him with the ankle lock, were really getting guys to tap out. But before that, we used to have the drop the arms 3 times, and then the third time you'd have to, raise your fist. But then with the dreaded sleeper hold, like if Chief Jay Strongbow put a guy out with the sleeper hold, it was his moral, ethic, and legal responsibility to lift the sleeping opponent off the mat, give him a little massage to the neck, and then slap him real hard and wake the guy up. And I mean, Nikita, what was that like? Like Chief Jay Strongbow in the sleeper hold. How did that have an effect on you as a fan?
I loved it. He was the guy that really sold it for me. The first match I saw was Tanaka against the Jobber. And I'm like, holy shit, look at this guy. And Tanaka looked like a block of cement. And, you could tell he was married because he used to break cement blocks with his head. He could really do that. And Strongbow, when I saw him the first, because he was on TV, it was like, holy shit. I mean, this guy was crazy. Absolutely. I mean, and I heard Cornette one time, and I love Cornette. He's a good guy. But he said, listen, I don't get it. He said, I'm not being disrespectful. We get out there, guys, they break their necks. They can't get a pop. Strongbow comes out there, he throws out his chest, and he shakes his head, and the place is coming unglued. He said, that's how you work. That's a worker. That's all you got to do. The least amount of expenditure of energy, and you get the best results. It's like, that's it. But he wore the colorful headdress, the bells, the whole thing, because he used to say that Larry Hennig would say, man, those bells, I hear the bells. That means money. You're working with the chief because you're working near the top. And it's like, yeah.
Chief was kind of in that security guard position. He was typically the number 2 baby face, like whether it was Bob Backlund or before him, Bruno Sammartino or Pedro Morales. I think Chief was basically the guardian of the gate. So if a heel worked his way up the rankings to get by the Chief, whether it was Greg Valentine or Ken Patero or whomever, if they beat the Chief, then they're going to wrestle the champ.
Well, no, because you didn't beat the Chief. I mean, now they did it with Firpo, Pantero Firpo in 1972. Chief's first loss in the Garden was a count out. But that was like, we really want to get this guy over big. Okay, let me back up, because Waldo Von Erich did it before Bruno, wrestling Bruno, and because he was finishing out the 3 series with Spiros Arion. It was April the 14th of 75. So, because I said to Chief, what the hell happened with Von Erich? It was like 39-second match. He said, I like Walter, and we want to get him over big. So I said, just to hit me. As soon as I ain't even going to take the headdress off. Turn around and hit me. He goes flying out of the ring, and Bruno had to come out and help carry the Chief back to the dressing room. Well, there was a riot. I mean, it was like people were fucking pissed. So they sent the midgets out right away. It's like, because then people start laughing when they saw the midgets, because it's like, well, we got to really like take the heat off here, because if not, they're going to tear the building down. And I saw that happen with Spiros Arion against Ivan Putski. And listen, this is no bullshit. This was not like a blade job, but Putski, Arion was a big bastard and he was tough, but Putski was trimming down and he looked like he was knocked out of a block of granite. So he's shoving Arion all around. So Arion gets him in a headlock, and I'm in the front row and I'm looking up. He takes out this pointed object and he jabs Putski in the head like 8 times, and the blood's pouring. So Putski goes over the top and he's counted out. Well, that was it. The fans were fucking furious. It started with an old man. He picked up a chair and he come towards Arion. Guards intercept him. Then they just start coming from all directions. And they kept catching everybody, but this one poor bastard got through, and he hits Arion from behind, and Arion turns around and says, motherfucker. He starts chasing the guy, and the poor bastard tripped and fell down. Well, Arion started stomping him, and blood's coming out of his ears, his nose, his mouth. The guards just scooped up Arion and hustled him away. It was like, that's a fucking riot. So then they sent Bobo out real quick with Tony Gurria. They were up next. And
Bobo Brazil.
Bobo Brazil, that brought the crowd down nice, because they were happy. Bobo hadn't been back for a year or so. They were happy. But it was like, I seen a lot of riots, and you can't make people like you or hate you. They either are or they aren't. You can have all the writers, all the publicity stunts, all the bullshit. It's either you're going to get over or you're not.
I've got 2 questions back to back from Laza and Adam, but first I want to address this thing. Reading your book, and having conversations with guys like Benny Scala and our mutual friend Evan Ginsberg, what didn't really occur to me, I think your book actually, I mean, as long as I've been watching wrestling, because I wasn't watching in the 1970s for the most part, basically the Worldwide Wrestling Federation was not like the World Wrestling Entertainment or even the Hulkamania era or the Attitude Era of WWF, because basically there was different bookers, different promoters. There was a different promoter for Jack Witchy's place in Fall River, Massachusetts, than there was in the Baltimore Civics. So this Nikita, believe it or not, was something I learned from your book that I didn't really quite grasp, and in some ways I still don't. That the Worldwide Wrestling Federation was kind of more like the NWA in a sense that I'm sure that if there was going to be a championship title change, like some promoter at Jack Witchy's in Fall River couldn't book an intercontinental title change or a tag team title change on his own. He couldn't say, hey, Gurria and Putski are going to beat the Moondogs tonight, or he couldn't go make that type of decision. But it seems to me that these promoters in the Jack Witchy's and other places, they had more control to put the matches together as they saw fit than I thought. Because when I think of Vince McMahon Jr. and the Hulk Hogan and the Don Morocco and Piper and all those guys, it's like the same card was more or less shown in different cities with some changes, some change-ups, to keep it fresh. Yeah. But a lot of times you'd see, like, if Tito Santana and Cowboy Bob Orton were going to have a 20-minute draw in Boston, the next night they'd be in Philadelphia with that 20-minute draw. You know what I mean? But sure. in this era of the 70s, it's more like a free-for-all. And I didn't quite understand that the different regional promoters all working for the WWF or all part of the WWF, it seemed like they were kind of in control of their own little city. Can you get into that difference for me?
Sure, because they were all under the same banner. However, you're going to, like you said, you're going to recognize the champions. Don't do anything to fuck with that. But, Patera wrestled Superstar for the belt up in Portland in Maine. 2 times they had a rematch, actually.
Heel versus heel.
Heel versus heel. But who knew about it? It was like, because Portland carried it. And Phil Zacco actually there was a feud with Tanaka and Ernie the Cat Ladd. Heel versus heel in Baltimore. Who the hell knew about that? Because there was a tag team match. It was Sonny King teaming with Bobo and Tanaka and Ernie Ladd. This was before Fuji actually got involved. So then, of course, they had one chopped the other one by accident. So then they got pissed off. And then next thing you know, they got a heel versus heel match. And it's like, as long as you don't get crazy. And again, because who knew what was going on? There was no sheets at that time in the 70s. You could get away with something like that. You could pull off. Baltimore would do his own. Well, Phil Zacco, though, ran Baltimore, Washington, and Philadelphia, plus TV. He was in charge of that. Because if you notice, they would say promoted by Phil Zacco, like Joe McHugh, the ring announcer, and Gary Capetta. And, it was like, I like that. Especially, did you ever hear the song by Ray Stevens, The Blue Cyclone?
I don't think I have, no. Not Crypto Ray Stevens, but the parody singer Ray Stevens.
The parody singer. That is spot on. It's funny as hell, but he has a line in there. First time this guy ever went to wrestling. His wife was away, so his buddy takes him to the match, and he's like, they turned down the lights, and the crowd began to scream. And it's like, that's right. That's exactly what would happen. You'd see the old men from the State Athletic Commission making their way towards the ring. And then when the lights went down, everybody would start to scream because they knew here it would come. The show's going to start. And it was just, you were kids at Christmas. Every month you were there. It was just like, all the troubles of the world are washed away.
I can remember all these years later, Nikita, the first time I stepped foot into the Capitol Center, and I had been there before for ice capades and stuff like that. But the first time going to the Capitol Center for a pro wrestling show, and seeing that blue canvas and the steel colored, posts, there's no advertisements or logos on the post or the ring apron. And it felt like there was this, once again, the word mystique. It felt like there was like a filter of smoke around the ring, and not cigarette smoke like Vince McMahon Jr. always said there was, which there wasn't. But basically it felt like there was this aura around the ring, like the shit's on. And you know, people, I don't want to say that, like I said, I don't think it's bad, because I go to the NXT shows in Jacksonville where there's 400 people, if that, going to this armory, like an old school armory, and they're seeing the same wrestlers that they see on the USA Network on NXT. I mean, it's the Tiffany Strattons and the Oba Femis and the people that are some of these people have action figures already, even when they're still in NXT, and some of them are super young, and they're those college athletes that probably weren't even a wrestling fan, but they're signed to the WWE as NXT wrestlers. And it's, for me, I don't have kids, but I see families with kids, and to me, it is kind of the same thing, believe it or not. It's like, for this 9-year-old kid who's going to see an NXT show in Jacksonville, Florida, the experience they're having is not terribly different than what I had going to the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. I'm sure for this 9-year-old kid, they're hopping in their parents' car. They're going 20 minutes away or 30 minutes away to some middle of nowhere place in Jacksonville, because it is kind of in the middle of nowhere. They're parking the car and they're going into this small little venue to see the wrestlers that they see on TV, and here they are live and in person. So like I said, things have changed, but things haven't changed at the same time.
Well, you would see some advertisements and it would say TV wrestling stars, and that was important. So you knew the guys you see on TV, that's who you're going to see at the arena. But back to the Capitol Center, that parking lot was like a small city. It's like, son of a bitch. It would take you a fucking 2 hours to get out of there. It wasn't too bad to get there, but to get off of it, it was, because I got stuck next to George Steele. Yeah. It was October 17th of 81, and he was on last, because then they were going to go to the Spectrum. That was an afternoon show. That's the double shot that Backlund and Morocco wrestled 1 hour draws in Capitol Center and Spectrum that night. And George Steele, he put a towel over his head so people wouldn't see him, but everyone was, hey, George Steele, hey, you son of a bitch. And he's stuck. Oh, what are you going to do? You can't go left or right. You're just caught up in this wave of vehicles. And
let me give a quick reference to the Capitol Center, because I don't know if you know about this one, Nikita, but Heavy Metal Parking Lot is a infamous cult movie classic of heavy metal fans, I think at a Judas Priest concert. And the parking lot is the Capitol Center parking lot. So if people want to dig that up, it's a legendary cult classic underground movie called Heavy Metal Parking Lot. And the parking lot is the Capitol Center's. What lessons, this is from Laza. Do you want to read this question out loud for everybody?
Yes. What lessons did Nikolai teach you about the wrestling business, both in the ring and as a personality? Well, yeah. Well, he gave me lots of training, because I had been trained with the police department, so I was a pretty good street fighter. Because he used to say, you go fuck somebody up. You got to take it easy. I'm going to show you how you do it, and don't kill them. Because when we became a tag team for a time, he said, you do all that wrestling shit, and I'll do the rest. I'll come in, I'll finish the match. He said, because you're good with that. But take it easy. Don't hurt nobody. I said, all right, Nikolai, just cut me loose. Let me go. But yeah, and the first match I ever worked was, anybody remember Dennis Carluzzo, the great Dennis, NWA.
Yeah.
And he's good friends with Cornette, and he had a standing invitation to Monday Night Raw, because Dennis was like a breeding ground. Like Al Snow would be on his shows, a lot of guys that were coming up the ladder. And New Jersey, he basically was a New Jersey promoter. So we were in Camden. So I kept pestering Nikolai. He said, all right, you'll be the manager. We're going to go tomorrow. We go Camden, then we go Fairless Hills, Pennsylvania. So I said, well, what should I dress? He said, I don't know. Wear some bullshit. Get a hat, put something red on it. So I had a German hat I picked up at the Army surplus. I put a red ribbon around it, and I had a trench coat that I wore for the police department. So it looked like Boris Badenoff, with the trench coat and a briefcase. But then I elaborated through the years, because Nikolai said, you spent so much money with that shit. What are you doing? But I got the coat that, believe it or not, Lord Alfred Hayes, when he managed Nikolai, that I had copied at Joanne Fabrics, of all places. And they did a wonderful job, and it cost like $40. I bought the coat, and then the place called Sunny Surplus, and then they dressed it up. But then over the years, my wife, Victoria, she made it, the shoulder boards are legitimate. Oh, boy, were they expensive. The buttons, the piping, and the different emblems. So it's like, yeah, I mean, if President Putin called me tomorrow, I could lead the troops into battle. And poor USA bastard, you'd be finished.
Here's a good question from Adam once again. Adam's here in Florida. What did Nikita think of some of the wrestlers from Mid-South coming up to wrestle in the Northeast from time to time? What were his thoughts on the territories, and did he believe in Vince's vision? So let me see if I can just kind of interpret some of these things. I think we're talking about, when I think of the, and Adam, if you're still with us, put some of the wrestlers you're thinking of, because I'm trying to think, do you know, because he's not talking like 84 when the Junkyard Dog came to the WWF full time. He's talking about some of the wrestlers from Mid-South coming up to wrestle spot shows. And I'm trying to think of, would that be Ted DiBiase? But DiBiase came in as the North American champion, a title they kind of fabricated for him. But who exactly is Adam talking about? Do you know what he's saying, Nikita?
Well, like Swede Hansen, he came from the South, you know, but he was in the twilight of his years. Because Swede Hansen, when you look at him with Rip Hawk back in the 60s, you wouldn't fight Swede. Even when he was older, I wouldn't fight Swede. He was a monster. But Greg Valentine, he came from the South, okay, at 79 when he came up, because he was NWA. And he had broke Wahoo's leg the year before. But Chief said he came up with that angle. He said, you know, why don't we do this? Because he used to be partners with Greg's brother, or his father, Johnny. They worked all the time together. It's Detroit, things like that. So Chief came up with the idea, and in fact, it's coming up, the anniversary, because we had a blizzard coming. Like I said, this was February 19th. It was actually Valentine's Day, no pun intended, because nobody knew when it was taped, but it was February 14th of 79. They were in Hamburg. And the reason they did it in Hamburg as opposed to Allentown, which they taped the night before.
This is Valentine breaking Chief Jay Strongbow's leg. Huge angle.
Broke Chief's leg, because it was a volunteer fire department, basically, that owned the building in Harrisburg, or in not Harrisburg, Hamburg. So it was like, all right, these guys can haul him, you know, we'll put him out by the ring after he breaks his leg, and then they can haul him off in the ambo. Well, the fucking volunteer fire department are out on a call. So it's like, son of a bitch. So they do the angle. Chief's laying out there. He said, I told Monsoon, break up the steps and make a split, you know, make it look good. Now, Chief should have got an Academy Award. I mean, he did a hell of a job selling that. So finally, you know, here comes the volunteer fire department. But Phil Zacco didn't want to open the doors to let the ambo in. He said, it's a fucking it's a blizzard ready to come. It's like 20 below out there. And it's like, Chief said, if you don't do it right, I ain't doing it. So they gave in. So Chief got a hold of the old man. He said, do what he says. So they did it. But then they're in the ambo, and Chief said, son of a bitch, because Monsoon got in with him, people are following us to the hospital. It's like, we believed. We loved it. It's like, poor, because Valentine used to say, you motherfuckers, you used to bust up my car and throw shit at me. It was, I made a lot of money, but you bastards. I was like, well, Greg, we hated your guts. You broke the Chief's leg. What do you expect?
You did your job so well. So Adam is clarifying Tony Atlas, I believe, in 79. I mean,
yeah, well, he came from, Tony came up and from NWA, he came up from down in the South. And it was like, well, how could you not? I mean, he enamored all of us, Tony Atlas. It was like, wow, you know, definitely legitimate Mr. USA, no bullshit. And he still looks like that today. You know, that the guy's in his 70s and he still looks like that. That's dedication. There's one of my all-time favorite people, too.
Tony Atlas.
Oh, yeah, beautiful guy.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun. I actually did want to mention, I met Nikolai, and Tony was there, too. I think it was the 2013 New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame induction ceremony convention. Joe Bruin ran it in New Bedford, Mass. And he really, I mean, and no offense to Joe, I think he might have overbooked because there were so many wrestlers there. There was like 40 or 50 name wrestlers, you know, everyone from, and Matt Bourne was there, and he passed away like a week later. So that was interesting. Jake the Snake was there, and Nikolai, Danny Davis, the referee turned manager turned referee, and Nikolai and Tony, they were all there. A lot of fun. And Tony has a real interesting sense of humor. I'll say that. But I wanted to just the flip of what Adam's saying of I remember, and the cool thing with wrestling is we can still watch some of these shows on Peacock and on YouTube. They do have like some of these early HBO telecasts or Madison Square Garden telecasts. One thing I'll give a lot of credit to the WWF is that they have, or WWE, they've chronicled a lot of these keepsakes, and I've seen stuff with Mrs. Krieger, and Vince McMahon yelling at Mrs. Krieger and stuff, and I really enjoy putting on those shows. I mean, sometimes, no offense, but sometimes the early matches on those shows, a lot of 20-minute draws. I mean, you'll see Johnny Rods go to 20 minutes with a lot of people, but I mean, some of the stuff is just great, and you'll see things like a Kevin Von Erich or a David Von Erich. Magically, they're on a Madison Square Garden show, like a young Kevin Von Erich, 1979, and I think David had a one-off where you'll see a random wrestler from a different territory pop in and get a Madison Square Garden match. And I think in Bret Hart's book, he talked about that they were trying to get Dynamite Kid to be there in Madison Square Garden in like 81 or something. And Dynamite missed his flight. So they brought in Bret at the last minute. And at the last minute, Dynamite showed up. So Bret got scratched. And they said to Bret Hart, well, we just don't think you're good enough to wrestle at MSG tonight, but we'll give you a paycheck anyway because you came out here. And Bret Hart was like, under his breath, I'll show you bastards one day. I'll be main eventing this fucking place. So, but can you mention that, Nikita? Like, did they do that in places like Baltimore Civic Center or the Capitol Center? I kind of think not so much. I think Madison Square Garden was more when that random outside the territory guy would show up. But did you ever see like some random wrestling match on a WWF show?
No. Madison Square Garden would do it because a lot of times people say, well, they had to stack the card for Backlund. No, they didn't have to stack the card for Backlund. And if you buy Bob Backlund's book, there's quotes from Harley Race and a lot of the greats. And they said, you talk about being over. If you know what the fuck you're even talking about, he was over without a doubt. And it's true because we bought the tickets. And if you don't believe it, watch some of the matches that Mike's talking about. Watch the pop that Bob Backlund gets after he beats the opponent. But those Madison Square Garden was Black Friday every month. If the Garden failed, the company as a whole, Phil Zacco, Witchy, everybody, they were going to go under. That's why Bruno, after the broken neck with Stan Hansen, when Vince Sr. and the old man went to the hospital, and it was like the doctor's like, who are these people? And they're like, they're trying to do what? They get you to wrestle. When? In 3 months? It's like, or 2 months? The guy was going to call the police, Bruno's doctor, but they said, Bruno, you just stay in bed because there'll be no company to come back to because they were booking that closed circuit event with Muhammad Ali against Inoki. Now,
right.
What the fuck do we know about Inoki other than see him in a magazine a couple of times? And boxer versus wrestler, shit, nobody cared. So they said, Bruno, you wrestle Stan Hansen at Shea Stadium. We'll simulcast that and we'll tie it all in. And Bruno's like, I don't even know if I can walk. I mean, but do whatever you want. And it worked out nicely. But that's just how intense it was. They had to, because Ken Patera almost failed because January the 17th of 77, his first night, he was going against Bruno. And there was not so much a snowstorm, but the temperatures were so brutally frigid. The rails were frozen, even for the subway. So they were about 4,000 short. And the old man was like, oh, no. He's like, this is done. Because they did 3, but then they planned 3. But he said, Bruno, this is done. He can't draw. And Bruno said, no, it's not him. It's the conditions. People can't get here. And of course, Bruno was right. His greatest matches and one of his favorite opponents was Ken Patera. But fate, just a bad night with the weather. And that's how much those old bean counters would shake in their drawers. If the money wasn't there, they weren't happy.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll give credit to my dad. He took me and a friend in the middle of the 82 snowstorm in Capitol Center. The schools were closed for a week. No plane rides. We're going in and out of Dallas.
Wait a minute, Mike. You mean 83? That 33
83.
Oh, my. Yeah, I had tickets February 12th, but I was stuck working 14-hour shifts, and I couldn't have got there if you paid me to go there. It was impossible. The roads were. I don't know how the guys got from Pittsburgh the night before to the Capitol Center. I mean, they were driving in the fucking thing.
I give credit to my dad in the Volkswagen. I think it was a diesel Rabbit. Like me, my father, and John McIntosh. We got there, and that was that was the main event. Was Ray the Crippler Stevens and Playboy Buddy Rose against SD Jones and Rocky Johnson. And
would you have like 4,000 people there if that were lucky?
I mean, I was 7 or 8 years old, but I mean, I had a good time, and oddly enough, like there was a decent crowd there, and there was a bunch of substitutions and stuff, but I mean, Big John Studd was still there. Morocco and Backlund had a hell of a good match that night. I mean, I think that was one of those deals. Here's the thing about Bob Backlund, Nikita, that we'll get to some more of these questions because these guys, Laza and Adam, have good questions tonight. But Bob Backlund used to lose a lot on cuts, which the aftermath. I think maybe the after magazines were more of my wrestling childhood than yours, because I was kind of into the Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It's maybe more than you were, but basically Bob Backlund was criticized in those magazines because he would get bloodied up by a Don Morocco quite a bit, and they would stop the match on what they called cuts, which is basically meaning the champion, Bob Backlund, is bleeding so much we have to stop the match. But they would not give the opponent, usually it was Don Morocco, the title. The champion would lose the match on cuts because he's bleeding too much. We got to stop the match, but the title would not change. And to me, that doesn't make any type of sense, because it's like, if you're saying that this guy cannot continue because of his own physical state of conditioning, shouldn't he be stripped of the title if he can't finish the match?
Well, you sounded like the Grand Wizard now, because that would be the following promo for the rematch. And it's like, if the champion can't continue, McMahon, why doesn't Greg Valentine have the belt? But see, like in the Garden, they would bring the doctor in, and he would take a look. Usually he'd let it go. And then after it continued, then the doctor would come and wave it off, and it's like, stop it. So it's like the doctor stopped the match, but then Backlund, to keep his heat, he would come back fighting. It wasn't like he crawled away or got carted off on a stretcher. He was showing he could still go, but the cut is just too severe, so we have to stop the match. Or sometimes just a ref would do it. But it was a valid point. If you can't finish the match, technically you should. It's called a TKO. And in boxing, if you lose a TKO, you lost the match. That's it, because you can't continue.
The little sliver that you put in there of, if a doctor comes out and like, hey, the World Wrestling Federation cannot control this activity. The doctor from the State Athletic Commission has stopped this beating, then it's out of our hands. The championship is no longer part of the circumstances because the state has ended this.
Now hold on. This is a good little thing to cut into. Everybody had to be licensed by the State Athletic Commission, referees, managers, the wrestler, and the doctor would give you an examination. And if you weren't fit, Nikolai had some trouble for a while because he had high blood pressure. And, Vince would have to go and barter on his behalf, but they were strict. I mean, you have to, it's money. Okay. The State Athletic Commission took a part of the gate. Everybody had to buy their license. And you had to have a license for each state. It wasn't like you got one license and it covered you throughout the territory. They didn't give a fuck about that. Every athletic commission wanted you to be licensed. And it was like, they regulated that shit. Now the indie shows, they would be really picky and bitchy and say no chairs, no fighting outside the ring, no blood. And it's like, well, what the fuck does Vince McMahon do? He comes in here, they're tearing up the building. What do you do about that? You guys are sitting at ringside. Because when I was a fan and I'm sitting in the front row, and George Steele would be there, he turned the table. He told me, he said, I like to fuck with those guys, because they were a pain in the ass. So he'd turn over the tables, and the old guys would be like, that fucking asshole, I hate when he's in town. And it's like, well, that's a great show for the crowd, though. We loved it. Anytime George Steele was more, what his match was going to be. And like he said, I shouldn't win. Why the hell do you want me to win? They come to see me lose. But then all the other shit he would do afterwards was the show itself. Because Mrs. Krieger, one night, she walked up behind him. She took her shoe off and was slapping him in the back of the head with the shoe. And he turned around and said, "Hey, bitch." He took the shoe and he ripped it with his teeth and threw it up in the air. And she's walking around all night showing her shoe to everybody that George Steele tore open with his teeth.
For those of you that are joining us later, I think at some point, like the 30-minute mark of this interview, I put quotes from the book. And the last quote that we showed was about George Steele. And George Steele's a real interesting character in the history of the WWF. I do want to acknowledge Laza. He's a wrestling historian, and he just watched the NWA 1994 title tournament that Chris Candido won recently. He watched it recently, but it was from 94. Dennis Carluzzo, that we were talking about earlier, ran it. I didn't even know that this existed, but the Savoldi Ultimate Classic Wrestling. I'm not sure if that's a YouTube channel or if that's a website, but these are really informed fans. And Laza did have another couple of questions that I think are pretty good here.
Well, somebody got a hold of that. I think it was his son, Dennis's son. He got a hold of a lot of his old NWA tapes, and they're starting to put them out. And there's some classic material there, without a doubt.
Nice. And so, having worked with old school talent, do you think today's talent could benefit from some of the practices of that era?
They wouldn't understand it. They could, but they wouldn't want to be interested in it. They would not understand it because it's a slower pace, but it's okay. Put it to you like this. When Kevin Sullivan, you heard of Andrew Anderson, and he inducted him. It was Cauliflower Alley. It was the year my book was released. It was in Las Vegas at Cauliflower Alley, and Drew was getting inducted as the Wrestler of the Year. So Kevin Sullivan did the introduction, and he said, I've been watching some of the matches out here. He said, it's not called spotting. It's called wrestling. You have a spot, one spot, not spot after spot after spot. And I saw George or Jim Ross say that recently too. And it's like, yeah, they're trying to outdo each other. It looks like the man on the flying trapeze. If you put an arm bar on and you held it, like you used to see Backlund or Bruno even, with an arm bar, I guess people would probably pick up the chairs and throw them in the ring and want a refund because they wouldn't know what the fuck was going on. It would be like, where's the excitement? Where's the action? And it's like, it's not supposed to be like that, dummies. It's supposed to be a wrestling match.
I'm going to give an exception because I think, and I do take the point, because I've made a similar point about today's wrestlers. And when I see guys, bounce, what I call it is like overly choreographed. It looks like the wrestlers are cooperating. And it's kind of an NXT and AEW issue. And you see the wrestler, especially when they kind of jump in the air, it looks like they're going for a reverse drop kick. But the wrestlers will kind of attack their opponent's midsection upside down in the air, and then the opponent catches them by the midsection. And I'm like, this looks like a choreographed dancing of like a gym.
Right, like you're waiting to catch him to make the next maneuver. Yeah. I know what you mean.
But I'm going to give you the exception to the rule, and I don't know if you watch these guys or not, but FTR, Dax Harwood, and his tag team partner, Adam will know the name of the tag team partner. I'm trying to blank right now, but Dax and who's the other guy, Adam, of FTR. They are a tag team in AEW. They got together in NXT. They were both NXT wrestlers that were put together maybe 10 years ago. I think Triple H championed them. When they first met each other, I think Dax said to the other guy, "Are you a Brett guy or a Sean guy?" And the other member of the newly formed team said, "I'm a Brett guy." Well, we were going to get along just fine. And thanks Laza jumped in. It's Cash Wheeler and Dax Hardwood. They had different single names when they were in the WWE, but basically they were the NXT champions. They were having great matches. They went up to the main roster on SmackDown. They won the belts on SmackDown. They won the belts on Raw. They're winning all the belts in the WWE, but they're still not really being respected as a tag team. At one point, and this is when the WWE in 2016 and 2017 was at the rock bottom creatively, because I think Vince was still running the show, but he was probably having issues with his memory and stuff. And they wanted these two great wrestlers who were basically a throwback kind of somewhere between Tully and Arn and the Midnight Express, like the Bobby Eaton, Stan Lane Midnight Express, and Tully and Arn. If you had a hybrid team of those two teams, that's how good these guys are. And my point is, Dax especially, but both Cash and Dax, they really are students of the game. When they went over to AEW, they had matches with the Young Bucks. They had a big series of matches, I think 3 matches with the Briscoe brothers shortly before, I believe, Mark Briscoe was the Briscoe that passed away, right? Not Jay. I get them mixed up. But basically one of the modern day Briscoes, not Jack and Jerry, but the Briscoes with the E. One of them passed away. But before they did, they had a series of matches with this tag team I'm telling you about. My point is, there are some guys that are exceptions to this rule. I would even say a guy like MJF, Maxwell Jacob Friedman in AEW, he is an old school heel. He does old school heel shit. He doesn't want to be a cool heel when he's doing heel work. He wants to be the asshole heel. And I do think that some guys, I do think there's some out there who still care. I think the problem comes, like I said, when I go to these NXT shows, and I'm meeting some of the wrestlers. They're really nice people. I mean, some of these women wrestlers are gorgeous, and they're very nice to their young fans, but they're basically being signed because they're gorgeous and athletic. Jim Ross often says that Vince McMahon told him to hire athletic 10s, but I don't know if these gorgeous college volleyball players or gorgeous college track athlete women, were they sitting there, studying Ricky Steamboat versus Don Morocco from 1985? Were they studying how Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik beat Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo at WrestleMania 1? I kind of doubt it, but maybe I'm wrong.
I got to manage Jessie Bell, and keep her in your prayers because she's battling breast cancer, and that's public. It's not something I'm letting out of the bag. Jesse Jones, if you follow women of wrestling. And, I'm right there at ringside and I'm watching, and it's like, man, what a beating they're giving each other. Women, right? And I'm like, I said, listen, I can tell you don't work every night because you wouldn't be killing each other like this. There's no way you can come back tomorrow night and work. It's crazy. I said, people are laughing. They think it's phony. Why are you doing this? You need to slow the pace down a little bit, do a little bit more with the maneuvers and things, but they just went out in full bore, and it's like basically beating the shit out of each other. In fact, I had to help catch Garcia, Nikila Garcia, because this big Amazon threw her out. It was a battle royal, and Jesse and I caught her, but I caught most of it. Plus, I got a kick in the back of the head when she was coming down, and it was like, this is dangerous shit. You shouldn't be throwing people. I mean, it's another thing to go over the top rope and hook it and break your fall, but when you just throw around like you're throwing somebody out a window, it's like, what the fuck? This is crazy shit, man.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact word. When I went to college, a guy who wasn't really a hardcore wrestling fan, but he was getting into it, this guy named Ted Rayo was watching a tape of, I think, Morocco versus Snuka from a prior generation, right? And this is a non-wrestling fan who's just kind of getting into it. And he said that one of the most interesting things about how pro wrestling worked was, I think he used the term lull or tension. And basically what he was talking about, there was like Snuka and Morocco, and they were in the ring together, but they hadn't even made contact because every time they were going to lock up, Morocco would kind of hide underneath the rope because he was afraid of Snuka. And what my friend was saying, and like I said, this was a non-wrestling fan. He was just a guy who was more into punk rock music, but he was picking up on every time Morocco refused to lock up with Snuka because they're in the middle of this awesome angle, the fans were going ape shit because I think that I don't know if the word was lull or tension, but basically he was saying the anticipation of these guys beating the shit out of each other, or specifically Snuka beating the shit out of Morocco, the tension, the buildup was more entertaining and more emotional than the actual payoff.
And the announcers could sell it because they would say, it's not that Morocco's a coward, but he's using psychological tactics to get Snuka riled up so that he'll make a mistake. and he'll be vulnerable to a maneuver and he could be beaten. And that made sense because it's like, he's not scared of him, but he is pissing him off. It's like he wants to kill him, and it's like, he keeps ducking out of the ring. And of course, then it was done more for our benefit to piss us off and make us crazy when they finally locked up. And then it was like, everybody's happy.
I think,
but the old mindset was like when you hear people say the superstar should have turned on, or Koloff turned on Superstar, make him a face. You couldn't do that because that's the guy that stole the belt from Bruno Sammartino. The mindset of the old timers was like, no, good must conquer evil. And there's no way we can let a guy that stole the belt carry the belt later or be a face, because they were saying, Backlund was boring. They should have gave Super. It's like, no, that it worked out the way it should have worked. Like when people say, well, what's your Mount Rushmore? I'm like, I don't know. I ain't worried about that Mount Rushmore shit. There's so many great people. How the hell did he name 4? It's unbelievable. But to see the old timers wanted the good to conquer evil. That was their mindset. And that's how it was always going to break down. But Superstar being a heel champion for 10 months, it was like, that was great. But everybody says, well, see how he drew it. It's like, no, they drew because they wanted to see Putski, Cheap, Bobo Brazil, Bruno get the belt back. They wanted him to be beaten, not him beat the other guys. There's a difference.
Let me just bang out this question real quick. Did you ever receive a crossface chicken wing from Bob Backlund? Adam from Florida wants to know. Okay.
No, never did. No.
You mentioned this in passing, and I don't think in our previous conversations back on the old Wrestling with the Future podcast, and for the record, I'm still good with Wrestling with the Future and Angelo, as well as Monty and the Pharaoh and Benny, and all these guys are good guys. So Dan and Benny in the Ring do a great show that I think is being simulcast on Monty and the Pharaoh these days. I think we glossed over it, and I think in my other discussions with you, this has been glossed over, that you actually did work some matches, and I didn't.
Yes.
I guess I don't think of you in that term because typically you don't promote that. But when you say you tag team with Nikolai, are we talking like 97, 98? What era are we talking about for that?
In the early 2000s.
Okay.
Now, I almost had an encounter with Backlund because we were in Staten Island. And Sarge was on the card, and Sarge was working a match with Backlund, Slaughter. So he said, well, this is a good idea. He said he brought Backlund over. First, he talked to Nikolai and I. He said, well, why don't you guys get involved in our match? And, we could do a big smodge with it. It could really, but Backlund was like, no, he didn't want to. He thought it was too much. And I'm like, oh, man. Come on, Bob, I'll pay you even. So that would be like a dream getting in there. Because I worked with Sarge with Nikolai before, so it was fine. But it was like Backlund he had a good business mind for wrestling. He's like, it would be too much. Too confusing, actually, for the people. But I think they would have loved it.
When you wrestled, did you strictly wrestle tag team matches with Nikolai?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I had a couple singles. Not a lot, but a few. And
would you... Go ahead.
It's like there was a point because Nikolai said when I wanted to just strictly go in as he said, no, you have a good job as policeman. Everybody gets hurt. So that's when he said manager. But then after a while,
I lost Nikita, folks.
You lost me? Can you hear me?
I can. You kind of went dark on me for a minute. I don't know if your Wi-Fi dropped out or maybe our show is. Now you look good. Go ahead.
Okay. So Nikolai said, manage because you're going to get everybody gets hurt wrestling and you have a good job. But then it got to the point we were going to these shows. I said, Nikolai, I'm bigger than a lot of these guys. He's like, yeah, fuck it. We become tag team. Not a lot, but enough, enough to get in there. And I enjoyed it because I know how to wrestle. I know martial arts. I know all that bullshit. And it's like, and that's why you got to be careful to know where reality breaks from fantasy so you don't hurt somebody. It's almost like people that are into wild sex. It's like you got to have safe words and all that stuff so you don't fuck somebody up, and everybody has a good time and they go home safe. That's it.
So you, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did you learn on the job? Did you basically not go to wrestling school? You just kind of got
Well,
thrown in the.
Nikolai and I worked out at his place because he had a farm,
Okay.
and his basement it was like he called it. He used to say basement, but it was like a gym. It was his gymnasium, so we worked out there, and he had a barn. And in the summertime, I mean, he loved his property because it was huge. It was probably maybe 10, 15 acres. And man, an Olympic sized swimming pool. And so we had all the room in the world to do whatever we want, work out, train, all that stuff. And he was big on training. And if you smoked, which I never did in my life, but if you smoked around Nikolai, he would slap you in the head. He didn't like that at all. You could do almost anything. Don't smoke around him. He couldn't stand that.
When you say smoke, you mean a basic cigarette or something a little more potent?
Just cigarettes. Oh, forget the other stuff, but just a cigarette. He's like, no, it'd kill yourself. Or drink a soda. It was like you drinking poison. He did not want to hear that.
I'm drinking a little bit of the bubbly here, just not to give them a free advertisement, but sparkling water, which is flavored. I have all these. Where the studio here is right next to my water supply, and I have basically every flavor you can imagine.
You think of a guy that was 345 pounds, and that was a lot to carry around for all those years. He trimmed down, like I said, 77 the box. He got like down to 290, but then he came back up because he always wore black. He was either a Mongol, or they said he was from Croatia or from Siberia. So he just wore black trunks and black boots and wore like a black pullover, and that was it. He didn't even wear a hat usually. When they were the Mongols, they had all the furs and that stuff. But then when Vince took over and it became more Hollywood, that's when he brought out the red and the flag and everything else. So Vince definitely wanted him to be back at 345.
When the Mongols managed by Albano?
Originally, Tony Angelo was their manager. But yes, because Tony Angelo, he wanted to stop wrestling. As they said, they traded. Angelo picked up Crusher Verdú, which was Lou Albano's first protege, and in return, he traded Ivan Koloff and the Mongols. But Tony Angelo, he was a guy from Montreal, and he was about done with the business. He was going away.
So when eventually Nikolai Volkoff premiered as Nikolai Volkoff, did any of the fans recognize him as a Mongol? As I think it was Beppo.
Some, because he was only 19 years old in 1970. But when he returned in 74, Fred Blassie's first protege, Nikolai Volkoff, you could tell, but the thing was he came with a full head of hair. So that threw you a little bit. Because, they had the pigtail, half bald as the Mongols. So it was like, it looked like him, but again, we were all in the dark back then. So we really did not positively know.
Here's a follow-up question about Nikolai from Laza. Nikolai's singing of the Soviet national anthem, which I always enjoyed that, by the way. Not to be anti-American, I just thought he had a nice voice. Nikolai's singing of the Soviet anthem is one of the most memorable parts of his character. Was that his idea, and how did he perfect
it? Excellent question. He was working in Louisiana. He was going to be against the Junkyard Dog. And he got a tape.
83, 84-ish.
Well, that was before the Vince McMahon takeover.
So maybe 82, something like that.
He's probably around there. So he had a cassette. If anybody knows what a cassette tape is, he got from his mother, and it had the Soviet national anthem. So they would play that. That was one of the earlier music introductions. So one night, and Jake the Snake's father, Grizzly Smith, was the booker. He forgot to bring the tape. They were working for Bill Watts. So Bill Watts said, okay, you're going to be fine because you fucked up the entrance. And Nikolai said, no, don't fine him. I can sing it. And they're like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Try it. Well, Nikolai said when they had made the announcement, of course, you got to work everybody. It's much better. They said, unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, Nikolai Volkoff's tape of the Soviet national anthem was lost. And everybody, hey, fuck that. And they said, however, Nikolai Volkoff is going to sing the Soviet national anthem. He said, oh my God. He said, First time in my life I was scared. When I started seeing they're stopping, beat the chairs, throwing shit in the ring, he said, I was scared that we're going to have a riot to kill me. And that was it. And from that point on, everybody said, fuck it, you sing it, man. That's better than anything.
I like I said, I did like his voice, and I thought he had a nice. I don't know. I just even as a kid, I didn't, and I was a babyface fan, but I thought Nikolai singing the Russian national anthem, I didn't see what was wrong with that because he's Russian. Why wouldn't he take pride in his own country? And I
Well,
do.
When he did Karamia for that wrestling album,
Yeah.
he said that was like 50 takes. He said same shit every time. That's the business, Nikolai. It's just like acting. You got to do same scene over and over. It doesn't seem like anything's there. But he said, I got sick and tired of this shit. And I don't know if he ever made any money off of that, but yeah, it was neat. The dolls were great, though. He made a lot of money off of that.
I was going to say that the Iron Sheik, I think they credit the Iron Sheik was saying like they had a quarterly check, which is like one check every 4 times a year for like 80 grand or 800 grand, some ridiculous number for the Iron Sheik for dolls. And once Vince McMahon Jr. saw how much the boys were getting from the dolls, he put an end to it because he didn't want the boys to have more money than him, or he didn't want the boys to be too empowered. What a great guy Vince is, huh? Vince Jr. that is.
Chief said he personally handed the Sheik $100,000 check for his cut of the dolls. And they had some kind of split worked out. Vince wasn't left out in the cold, believe me. He's not that dumb. Because, like, if you ever hear some of the old Piper interviews, the shoot interviews, like he said, they were always, Vince himself was always, because he was doing all of the negotiating straight up, he would come to you with something, and it's like, I need you to sign this now. And it's like, Piper's like, what am I going to say? No. They'll send me home. I don't have time to consult a lawyer. He just signed it, and that was it. You're getting fucked, but what are you going to do? You got to sign it. So you signed it, and that was it.
Here's a good question from Adam. Why did so many grandmas, we mentioned Mrs. Krieger, why did so many grandmas like going to these shows in the 1970s? Like my grandma would take me to shows in Mobile, Alabama in the early 80s. So I'm thinking that's Ron Welch and Bob Armstrong and guys like that. But that's a good question. And it's, just to jump in, my grandmother, my father's mother, who, I didn't know very well in my life because she passed away when I was very young, but apparently she was a pro wrestling fan, and that's kind of planted some seeds with my dad. So when I got into wrestling, my dad wasn't a fan, but he kind of empowered me by taking me to the shows, and he would watch it out of deference to me, as would my mother. But the seeds were planted, with my grandmother. She was a pro wrestling fan. So any thoughts on the grandmas liking wrestling, Nikita?
I don't know, because Jimmy Carter's mother did. Because there's a lot of pictures with him and a whole group of wrestlers in Mid-South and with Mr. Wrestling 2. And,
There's a famous picture of Jimmy Carter with a headlock on Mr. Wrestling 2.
Yeah, because they put that on a lot of the programs, even in the Northeast, to show that the former president of the United States was a wrestling fan. And it's like, well, there are stories that Sergeant Slaughter was called to the White House by Ronald Reagan because he wanted to meet him. And then he said, well, all right, put the Cobra Clutch on me, Sergeant. And the Secret Service is like, no, we can't do it. Oh, he could do it easy. It's like, no. How many, look, lawyers, doctors, there's so many walks of life. When the word wrestling comes up, their eyes like a slot machine, and they start spewing the stories. It lives within so many people. It affected so many people. It's the longest running reality show in the history of television. It was on the old Dumont Network, one of the first things that was ever broadcast, and it continues till this day. It's not always Monday Night Raw, but it was wrestling. And it's like, it's great for television because, boom, you got it right there. It's easy for the cameras to catch everything. It's perfect. People loved it. You could fit it into an hour format. Boom, bring them back next week.
Here's a question that I don't have an answer to, and which means it's probably a good question. Laza, once again from Australia, And we can kind of tailor this as you can answer it, and maybe I can chip in, but I don't have an answer off the top of my head. What do you think the fans misunderstand or overlook about Nikolai Volkoff's contributions to wrestling's golden age?
That's a good question because he is overlooked. He did get into the Hall of Fame, but that was the Hulk Hogan show, and all the famous heels that worked with Hogan. Stallone, I was there. Stallone inducted him because Paul Orndorff was pissed. He
This
said,
is like the 2005 Hall of Fame induction. Is that right?
2005. And he said, Hogan wouldn't be shit without us. But, here we are, and he's getting the grand entrance and everything else. But, at least they got that recognition. They were put into, look, there's still so much controversy about that Hall of Fame. And it's like, I don't know, at one point they were going to have a brick and mortar building. I don't know if that's still in the works or not. But it's kind of like, it's a cyberspace thing. Because some people really get wild about it. That Waldo Von Erich and Spiros Arion aren't in it, and a lot of other greats. And it's like, well, is it really? And Ivan Koloff, especially a former champion, Ox Baker, is it really legitimate? I mean, technically it is, but I don't know. It's a weird situation. Well, there's another character, Ox Baker, and I guess you've seen him on The Price is Right. That's on YouTube. Right?
Well, I was friends with Ox Baker. I interviewed Ox Baker. It's on this channel. Ox Baker, one of the boys, was a year before Ox passed away. He demanded that I come to his house immediately and interview him for his goodbye address to the fans, which is Ox Baker, one of the boys. Yeah. So I was pretty tight with Ox. That's
wonderful because I got to know him over the year. He was trying to help my wife with diabetes. And, he was always easy go. We were at a show up on Long Island. It was autographs. And then at night, he and Johnny Rods were doing the commentary. And we went to Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he's ordering. I wish I had a camera. It was hysterical. Just ordering fucking chicken. And Ox Baker, he could always bring the house down. Good old Douglas. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. And there you go. You've seen The Price is Right segment.
Yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
And it's like he acted so much different, acted normal. But Bob Barker's like, holy shit, man, Douglas, I hope you win, because I don't want you coming after me. And it's like, he just grinned, It was
no, he lived the gimmick, and Ox had like the giant mustache and the bald head, and just, and I would drive, an hour and a half to go to Danielson, Connecticut in Ox's later years and just meet him at Burger King and just hang out with him for 2 hours, and he would hold court at the Burger King, and it was worth the price of a couple of burgers because it was just Ox holding court. The only time I felt a little uncomfortable was one day we went I think for some reason we were just sick of meeting at the Burger King, so we met at this diner, and the diner, which was around the corner from the Burger King, but it was like one of those diners in a, like not an RV, but in a, talk about like a mobile home or whatever,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like a converted, whatever it is. And it was just too tight of a place for really Ox Baker to be in. Like the booths were too small and everybody was like too tightly packed in. And I'm like, okay, well, next time we go back to the Burger King where at least we can stretch out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, the WWE Hall of Fame, I mean, right now they have some type of experience in Saudi Arabia, which in my opinion, I mean, that's one of the things, not to get too political, but the WWE as well as the UFC kind of bending the knee to the Saudi Arabians, and no offense to the Saudi Arabian civilians because they're under the oppressive government, but this government, I believe, executed 71 civilians in one day. So this is not a government that I particularly want my wrestling company or my Ultimate Fighting company to be bending the knee to, but they take great pride in bending the knee. Yeah, exactly. So when guys like The Undertaker, who I have respect for Mark Callis, obviously, but he's happy to go over there and take a big paycheck, and they're not exactly going to the cemeteries where 71 decapitated Saudi Arabian civilians that were probably protesting for their own rights are buried. So to me, when we talk about when Vince McMahon Jr. specifically pisses on the smoke-filled arenas of the business that basically built his life, I would take that smoke-filled arena any day, whether it was the Memphis Coliseum or the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland, or the Charlotte Coliseum or the Greensboro Coliseum or the Dallas Sportatorium. I'd take those 100 times out of 100 than the Saudi Arabian place or some 100,000 seat football stadium that they're booking a 2-night SummerSlam. So I personally get offended, and I guess Vince McMahon's not with the company now, but his legacy is still tainting that promotion. And the when it was real, the 70s, I mean the 80s, the 90s, those to me, I do think you can compare eras. I don't think necessarily it's fair to say, well, who's a better champion, Bob Backlund or Cody Rhodes? I mean, it's an apple and an orange. You know what I mean? It's just too different to compare stuff like that. I was personally thinking that they were going to have Roman Reigns beat Bruno's record, believe it or not. I was predicting that because I thought there was such a movement with the Triple H and the Vince McMahon, WWE, that they wanted to absolve anything like the Honky Tonk Man's longest reign of Intercontinental Champion. Well, we got to make Gunther the longest reigning champion. The Demolition were the longest reigning tag team champions. We got to make the New Day the longest running champions. And I thought they were going to do that with Roman. I thought he was going to bust through Backlund and Hogan and Bruno's longevity, but they didn't do that.
Well, they got pissed at Bruno when he left to try to start his own IWA in 1982. So that's when they brought Bellomo in and started to bill Sal Bellomo as the greatest wrestler ever to come out of Italy. And it's like, you got to be kidding me. But you pissed off, as Chief used to call him, Caesar. So Caesar was mad. So that was it for Bruno. Till they made up later, and then they brought Bruno back in. And Bruno did it to try to help the son, and the story goes on and on and on. It was like
this IWA thing. Now the IWA that I'm thinking of was like Ivan Koloff and Mil Mascares and.
Okay, wait a minute. That was an IWA. Maybe Bruno. It was Bruno and Savaldi, I believe, PWA or something like that. It was based out of Pittsburgh because they had Johnny and Jerry, and they had Rocky Jones, who used to be Mike Masters. I mean, he worked on the undercard. And they were trying to bring up, because that's why Chief and Ivan Putski came back to the WWF in '82, because they were trying to court them. And the old man was like, no. But see, now that IW, okay, that was IWF. IWA was the thing with Koloff and Mascaras running out of Roosevelt Stadium in Jersey City, which I had the pleasure to be there. Now it's a recreation center. I didn't have any wrestling to do there. We were wrestling in the neighborhood at a smaller venue, but it was like, that's historic. I was glad to go by there. And I was with Evan Ginsberg and a friend of his who's passed away, Marlon, who was Tiger Khan. So we shot a little promo out there, but it was nice to be there. Problem was they didn't have television, and you're not going anywhere without television. And Vince Sr. had it locked up with the New York area, so you're screwed. You can't get people to buy the tickets if they don't, like some of these bullshit promoters today. And I'm sorry, they're bullshit promoters. They said, "Well, I posted it on their internet." It's like, so what? That doesn't mean anything. Or I got a commercial on Monday Night Raw. They're like, it ain't gonna do you any good. You got to get your ass out there. You got to bring people in, and lazy sometimes and cheap. One time I was going to help promote a show at the Baltimore Civic Center for an indie group. And when I picked up the phone, they said it's $7,000 to turn on the lights.
Wow.
Forget it. That's done.
That was, yeah. I mean, I remember this was maybe 2011 or 2012, that the University of Rhode Island has a pretty decent arena on the campus of the school. And it's maybe like a 7,000 or 8,000 seat arena. And they have the Harlem Globetrotters there, and they have like, pretty decent, touring acts in this 7,000 or 8,000 seat or indoor arena on a college campus. And the WWE, when they would go through town, they'd have Randy Orton versus John Cena at the campus of URI in this 8,000 arena. Some indie promotion booked a show there, and I went to it, and there was maybe 100 people in a 7,000 or 8,000 seat arena. And it's like, guys, I mean, I don't know if they paid $7,000 like what you're talking about, but they had to pay more than they made. Let's put it that way, you know. So
We
it's
could do a
tough.
whole show on the times I've seen people cry tears and almost had blood coming out of their ears because they were losing their ass. It's just people did not show up, and they overbooked, and you know it was expensive. I got paid with nickels and dimes a couple of times because it was like, uh-oh, you can see nobody's coming. So you get the half before you get there. And I went to the promoter. I said, we need our money. And it was like, I have to pay dollars and maybe some change. I was like, I don't care. We'll take it. Then I told Evan to go get Johnny Valiant's money. And it was an ugly scene towards the end because then the guy had to have his mother come, his mother, with a checkbook. And you don't want to give a wrestler a check. You know, it's kind of like, that's bad news because there's been so many bad checks over the years. Nobody wants to hear that shit. You can send it early and make sure it cashes, but don't try to pay them the night of the show with a check. That's not good.
I want to go back to this question real quick, and we'll wrap it up in a couple of minutes, Nikita, because we've been going strong for over 2 hours. I really thank you for being here. And once again, folks, Nikita's book, When It Was Real, I took basically, there was a quote from the book. You've seen me tonight a few times flip through because I marked a quote that I really wanted to share. And of course, now that we're on the hot seat, I can't find, there's one specific quote. So maybe we'll have to do this again in a couple of months or something, or a couple of weeks, because there's more in this book. I mean, we talk about the Yukon Lumberjacks. Was that one of the Irwin brothers? Was Scott
Irwin? Yeah,
yep, Scott.
He was Eric.
Yeah, Scott. There's a lot of guys that, you know, there should be a whole book based on guys like Scott Irwin and I guess Nikolai and Crusher Khrushchev or Barry Dawsaw is probably the king of these guys. Guys that were kind of main event journeymen, if that makes any sense. Like guys like a Barry Darsaw who had 2 or 3 or 4 manifestations. You know, he's Crusher Darsaw, he's Crusher Khrushchev, he's a demolition guy, then he's playing golf. And Nikolai is kind of like that. He's a Mongol, and even Killer Kowalski, he's an executioner. Big John Studd's an executioner. You know what I mean?
And Nikolai was a super destroyer in 1978. Nikolai, he did that in 1978 for one taping.
That was with a mask?
Yep. And he was managed by the Wizard, but he said, I could not breathe. I could not see. He said, I'm fucking up all the spots because I couldn't see shit. And it's like, Nikolai was no ballerina in the ring to begin with. He was no tactician. So it was like, because Chief used to say, I say, Nikolai, when I do this, move in. When I do this, move back. He'd get it all mixed up. I said, stand in the middle of the ring. I'll work around you. It was easy. That way, he said, he's like a cement mixer. He hurt you by accident. It's like, yep.
There's several instances in this book where something, you know, and some of it is like these, I don't want to say phantom title changes, but maybe like a title change that was taped for television but then like broadcast after it, and like some of these time warp things, and some of basically certain points that you pick up on as a fan that didn't quite, that they kind of tipped the hat to something, you know, to wrestling not being on the up and up. And
but you are correct. There were some phantom title changes. Even when Pedro Morales lost, they didn't properly describe it. It was a double pin. He had this full Nelson on Stasiak. He kicks back, and Stasiak gets the pin because they said Morales didn't lift his shoulder. But on television, because they didn't have videotape, they said the heart punch won it. And it's like, they didn't hit him with a heart punch. And the first Worldwide Wrestling Federation Tag Team Champions, Crazy Luke and Tarzan Tyler, supposedly beat Dick the Bruiser and the original Sheik in New Orleans on May 31st of 1971. Never happened. They just said, look, because Nikolai and his partner, Beppo and Guido, Newton Tattery, they had a little discrepancy with the office, and they went and bought the Pittsburgh territory. So they left with the belts, undefeated. So now it's like, and that's when I say the tag team championship curse began, because it happened so many times over the years. People would get hurt, and then they get fucked over. Like Tanaka was always, Calhoun kept hurting Tanaka over the years. Fucked up his ankle one time, fucked up his ribs another time. And it's like, man, keep them two apart, please, because you're ruining the tag team championship. Jeez. But Calhoun was just a giant. And now there's a guy, 600 pounds, walked to the ring under his own power, He didn't do cartwheels. He'd give you 5 or 7 minutes in there, put the horseshoe on, and walk off. And it's like, that's amazing. He could get it done. It's crazy.
I was listening to a interview with Tony Gurria, I think, on Title Match Wrestling, and Tony said that he and Haystack Calhoun teamed up to wrestle Fuji and Tanaka for 32 minutes, and Tony wrestled 27 minutes of the 32 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Um, there was a question from Laza that I had up again, and it was about Nikolai Volkoff's and his contributions. And I think when Laza's saying golden age, I'm going to go with like 84 to 86, 87, and I'll just give my take on that. I think that as great as the Iron Sheik was as a heel, like a foreign heel, and Iran #1. I think the real deal is for the people of that era, the Cold War was between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Sure.
And Nikolai, and let's put Ivan Koloff and Nikita Koloff, they were doing their thing in the Carolinas. But if we're talking strictly WWF, MTV, Cyndi Lauper, Rock and Wrestling Connection, the Goonies video and so forth, the Cold War was Russia, not Iran. And Nikolai Volkoff, although at times he was kind of the Iron Sheik's, enforcer in the tag team, but Nikolai, I believe, was the main event challenger for Hulk Hogan at the second Saturday night's main event. I can't remember the venue, but I remember that the first.
Meadowlands.
Where was it?
Meadowlands.
The Meadowlands. Okay, so the first.
Burn Arena.
The first one, I think, was Cowboy Bob Orton versus Hogan, and then the second Saturday night's main event was Hogan versus Nikolai, the way that I remember it.
Yes.
And Nikolai came out with the Russian flag. Hogan came out with the American flag. So my opinion is just that Nikolai, and he was getting a little bit older because he had been wrestling since the early 70s, and this is 85, 86. So he's kind of in the prime of his career or the second half, whatever. But Nikolai, he was carrying that Russian flag. And when talk about this is pre-Gorbachev, whoever was before Gorbachev, was it Khrushchev or somebody in real life I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
But basically, Nikolai was the heel representing real life USA's #1 enemy, if you want to call it that, rival. And we're talking real life because, I mean, the way that we talk about China now, perhaps a lot of that is economic. But back in the 80s, it was someone might blow somebody up. Like, this is real deal heat, so to speak. This is legit. Someone might push a button and blow the other country to smithereens. And people, they made a movie called The Day After about what would happen the day after nuclear war. So, I mean, and we still have that now. Nikita, I mean, I think I saw something on TV in the gym today of possibly Iran is looking to make a nuclear weapon or something. But my point is that hasn't gone away, like that fear of nuclear war. But in the 80s, it seemed to be a higher ratchet of nervousness because of people were really on edge quite a bit. And so Nikolai Volkoff was a representation of that.
Well, see, now he had to be convinced. Because throughout the 70s, like I say, he just wore black. He didn't make a big deal of it. Yeah, he was from Russia, blah, blah, blah. But then when Vince's Nikolai Volkoff, he didn't want to do that. And Freddie Blassie talked him into it because he said they stole the family farm when he was in Croatia. He said they were bastards because Nikolai was a weightlifter and for Croatia. And then they were competing in Canada, and he went left, and when they were all supposed to go right and go back home, and he just disappeared into the crowd, and then Stu Hart brought him in. But he did not want to portray that character, and Freddie Blassie said, Nikolai, you dumb son of a bitch, you can show everybody what bastards they are, and you can make a lot of money. He said, I don't think that, Freddie, you're right. So he did it. And
what bastards the Russian government was.
The Russian government, yeah.
So the best way, Nikolai, you can, show your love for the Croatian people is to portray this Russian, evil guy. And Nikolai did it wonderfully. And so I think when Laz asked the question of Nikolai's contributions, I think it was really, to me, like we just discussed, it was the spot of waving the Russian flag for lack, to synopsize it. But
But it got to the point in later years, and he would want to be a face. It's because he sold more pictures and sing "God Bless America," and people say, "No, we want to hear the Soviet national anthem." And he said, "What the fuck is wrong with them?" I said, "They know you for that. They love it. They grew up with that. They hear "God Bless America" by all kind of goofs. They want to hear you sing the Soviet national anthem." He said, "All right, I sing it," and that would be it.
Here's a question for you off the tip of my head. When Iron Sheik got suspended, he and Hacksaw Duggan had an unfortunate, real life scenario, and the Iron Sheik was kind of, kicked out of the WWF for a couple of years because of that. They brought in another guy. He used to wrestle as Private Jim Nelson with Sergeant Slaughter. He became Boris Zukov. He had a prominent sized head. I mean, it was kind of a cool thing with Boris Zukov, but they brought him in basically to take the spot of the Iron Sheik to team with Nikolai Volkov. And it was kind of a cool team for a while, but they didn't have him go over too much. Nikolai Volkov and Boris Zukov as the Bolsheviks.
Yes.
Did Nikolai, because that team only lasted maybe a year and a half or so, did Nikolai ever tell you any stories or have any take? Like, did Nikolai have an opinion on the Bolsheviks team that you remember?
They made money. He said they got along, him and Nelson. He said it was okay. He said, I can no complaint. So
I think it might. Go ahead.
He said he liked it. It was fine.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking out loud. Like, maybe the reason why the Bolsheviks didn't get over as much as they might have is because the dynamic of the Sheik and Volkov. You had like the Iranian guy with the Russian guy. You had the big brute of Nikolai, the muscle, and then you had the technician. Although the Sheik was incredibly strong as well, but he was smaller. He was more ripped, and the Sheik, I guess, would kind of be the mouthpiece. Although Nikolai did the singing, so I mean, you had Freddie Blassie thrown on top of it. So that was really like a dream heel team.
But you have to know, like when people talk about, well, Hulk Hogan changed the face of wrestling in 1984. Partly, the Sheik against Sergeant Slaughter was a big feud. And then Nikolai and the Sheik as a tag team, Roddy Piper. There's a lot, and Orndorff, there's a lot that went into 1984 besides just Hulk Hogan. Yeah, it was, I liked it a little bit. I was not happy with the change. I'm still not, but I accepted it because our people were getting older, like Chief and Bruno and all. It's like it had to change. And Vince was right. He's got more billions than I do. So how do I argue? Vince is right. But you got to acknowledge, like Slaughter, when they made him a face, boy, that was a great move. As a great heel, also because of the Cobra Clutch. But when he became a face, he was probably one of the all-time great faces and a tough son of a bitch.
When I guess this will. Did you go cold turkey when Hogan? Because talking to you before and even reading, I think I picked it up on this book, but maybe I'm wrong. When Hogan beat the Sheik for the title in January of '84, did you basically stop being a WWF fan? Did that really turn you off, or was there a gradual thing, or how would you describe that?
I call it the day the music died, but I was chasing the Sheik Slaughter feud. Sheik and Slaughter, and then Sheik and Nikolai, up until about, well, you know what happened with Slaughter? He left because he got into a merchandising battle. Because Nikolai said, that killed me. I was getting ready for a big run, and then Slaughter leaves. So then that was about it. The end of '84, when the slap heard around the world, right after Dr. Schultz slapped that goof Stossel, that was about it. Then it was like '85 just kind of went flat and stupid to me. I didn't care anymore.
Did you ever like start watching National Wrestling Alliance, like the Magnum TAs or the?
No, I had my tape collection. I had VHS tape before I transferred the DVD. But yeah, so I was always. I don't miss a day without wrestling. It will never happen. I've got enough. I could run my own network because that was a big thing in '83. Was tape trading and buying VHS tapes. that was really big stuff. And to see the things you'd heard about through the years, it was like, wow. It was like finding gold. And it was expensive too.
So would you watch things like would you for instance watch Memphis Wrestling, Jimmy Hart and Jerry Lawler and Eddie Gilbert? And
No, no, I never watched. I couldn't tell you a thing about it. Like people say, well, what do you think about Harley Race? It's like the only thing I seen Harley Race was wrestling Backlund and Dusty Rhodes in Madison Square Garden. I wish somebody had the tape of Tony Garea challenging Harley Race on December the 18th holiday card of '78. That had to be, I think that's bigger than Wrestling Superstar, because Tony Garea was a damn good single, but he got the tag, no pun intended, of a tag team wrestler, and that killed him as a single.
when you were doing stuff with Nikolai, like in the late '90s, early 2000s, and you know, and I know that there was an indie wrestling scene going on that you guys were a part of, but would you check in and say like, oh, The Rock is wrestling Triple H? Or did that have any interest to you? Or at that
Yeah,
point?
I love that Vince McMahon Stone Cold angle. I mean, we were, again, with Carl Luzo, and Jim Cornette was there a lot. So we got to see a lot of because I got to befriend Droz, because he would interchange with
Darren Drozdev.
Yeah, with Carl Luzo. And so we were, the wife and I, Victoria, we had a lot of fun watching every Monday night. And then we would do a show, listen in for Phil Varlese and John the Hitman House, the wrestling guys, and when we weren't on the show as guests. And so we would listen to them and then watch Monday Night Raw. And it wasn't wrestling. It was like slapstick wrestling comedy. What the hell was Vince and Stone Cold going to get into that week? And you loved it.
Laza's referencing the New Japan Pro Wrestling Super J-Cup '94. He had a VHS tape of that. I did as well, and there was a lot of guys on that tape that would a whole generation would influence. Liger and dare we say Chris Benoit and many others. But so that to me is interesting. Did you ever go back as a fan to Baltimore Arena to watch any Hulk Hogan title defenses or Stone Cold?
We would go backstage when they would be in town and visit with everybody. That's like you hear of a guy named James Dudley, who they inducted into the Hall of Fame.
The limo driver for Vince Sr.
Yes, and they gave him the tag, and I believe it was some legitimacy that he was Bobo Brazil's manager in some way, shape, or form. So Dudley would come in, and he was in a wheelchair. This was like in the early 90s. And Vince would spend time with him. In fact, they bought him a wheelchair. He needed a new wheelchair. And I was present when Vince McMahon looked at Nikolai and said, "This is your home. You'll always belong here." He didn't give him any more dates, but, it was like, okay, well, that was nice enough. He didn't slip him money or anything, but it was acknowledgement. It's like, because if Nikolai came with his utility bills, if Vince could help me pay it, I think he would have been shown the door. But he was nice to him, we'll say that. And he was nice to me many times, and it's great.
They eventually started doing, occasionally you'd see a guy like Nikolai or even Kamala. They'd get a little segment on Monday Night Raw. You know what I mean?
Kamala, I loved him.
Yeah. James Harris. It was funny around 2016. You'd see Kamala, the Ugandan giant, wearing the Kamala for President T-shirt.
Yes.
The Kamala Harris thing. I remember it was the pandemic era where I think like Kamala, the wrestler, passed away, and the very next day Biden announced Kamala Harris as his vice president, and I had a video of my Kamala the wrestler tribute, which I think got a bunch of hits because people were looking up Kamala Harris. And but it's just some of those things, like we mentioned Ray Stevens earlier, and you were talking about the parody singer. I didn't know that Ray Stevens, the singer, had a wrestling song.
The Blue Cyclone. There's even a video, but it's spot on and it's funny. You laugh your ass off.
I'll look that up.
Kamala, because Chief knew I was going to see him at a show. And he said, "Tell him I said, say hi to the pig farmer," because he was a pig farmer. So I said, Hey, Jim, I said, somebody sent the message to you. They said, say hi to the pig farmer. And he said, that's got to be Chief. And he, big smile on his face. He was happy. It's like,
I remember
that's
being,
nice.
I remember
They
being
connected.
being a child and seeing that the like CBS was going to have the Billy Graham crusade and getting all excited. I'm like, oh man, the guy that just destroyed the WWF title belt over Bob Backlund, he ripped the title belt to shreds, and now he's going to have a whole 2-hour show talking about it on CBS. And I tune in and some guy talking about God, because it was the Billy Graham crusade, but it wasn't superstar Billy Graham. It was just some low rent preacher man.
That name, that was weird for a while there. It's like, wait a minute, Billy Graham, what is he, ripping off the preacher? And it's like, no, he's been superstar Billy Graham for a lot of years, because who the hell knew what was going on in the West Coast? Because he wasn't that prominent in the magazines. And then when he came to the Northeast, boom, he was. Then you knew it.
That's one thing. I mean, we had so many good questions tonight. We're going over 2.5 hours, but basically, God, there's so much to talk. We'll have to do this again. But one thing we didn't get to, and maybe we'll save this for the next time, is just that overall feeling. And it's really, I think your book does a great job in contributing to this memory that I'm trying to articulate for the guys that are younger than us that weren't around for this. But the mystique, the territorial divisions. I mean, there was a song, I think, by Nirvana on one of their albums, probably the Nevermind album, called Territorial Pissings. And I just think of that. I reference that in a good way to, you had Memphis, you in your territory, Nikki. And for instance, this is your book. The book is great. The only book that I can compare to your book is, I think it's called Front Row Section D by John Hitchcock. He's basically the Nikita Breznikov of the South. John Hitchcock was one of those Four Horsemen fans that helped get the Four Horsemen over in Greensboro, like the fans that would wear suits and go to the matches in Greensboro, and they would start raising the four fingers. Like, those were the guys that helped get the Horsemen over. And John Hitchcock was basically the leader of that gang. And when I was in Greensboro, I met the guy, and he owns a comic book store called Parts Unknown. So I've interviewed John Hitchcock. He was like the guru of the Carolina wrestling fan contingency, and he wrote a book. I think it's called, I always get it, dyslexia, but Section D Front Row, or Front Row Section D, John Hitchcock. I've got an interview with him on this channel, and you guys would hit it off, because he was doing in Charlotte and in Greensboro especially what you were doing in the Northeast, in Baltimore, in Landover, Maryland, for the Cap Center and MSG. And so your two books, to me, it's kind of like that Cornette Paul Heyman Dangerously thing. It's like if you're from the South, you got Cornette. If you're from the Northeast, you got Heyman. And you and John are kind of like that with the wrestling books. But this book is great, and
Thank you.
I really enjoy it. But to me, what I was getting to, buddy, was the territory thing. And I think what killed it, and people will blame Vince McMahon Jr., it's not really just him. It's just cable television. We went from a country where your UHF, your local channels, if you're in Memphis, you're having a different life experience than if you're in Cleveland, Ohio, or if you're in Miami, Florida, or if you're in Sarasota, New York. And that's still true to an extent. But with cable television and USA Network and MTV, HBO, suddenly the whole country is connected, and eventually the whole world is connected through pop culture. Yes, like, for instance, I live in Florida now. I used to live in Rhode Island. There is a different culture, but a lot of it is the same, because you go on every corner and you have your staples and you have your Panera Bread and so forth. But I think what the 1970s, Route 66, and just, being in a different part of the country actually meant something. Like, it meant a different thing to be in the Northeast than the South or the West.
And we had to work for it, because the Baltimore show was on Saturdays at 4, but it was still a UHF's channel. You needed rabbit ears to get a clear picture. Anybody that don't know, that was just a rotary, was a aerial on top of the TV, and then you would put aluminum foil and get a clearer picture. But the All-Star Wrestling show would come on before it was Saturdays at 11. It would be on Tuesday nights at 1:30 in the morning. Can you imagine that? When you have to get up in the morning, but you were staying up to watch it because it was wrestling. You had to see it.
There is a quote. That's what I was trying to find in your book. It's somewhere where you said something like, the main event. I'm just kind of guessing at what I was. I can't find it, but I'm trying to paraphrase. Maybe you remember it, but it was like the main event was announced for the next month as Bob Backlund versus Pat Patterson for the 4th time in 5 months. Nobody wanted to see this match again, but we all bought tickets because it was wrestling. There's a quote that's something like that in the book.
Yes.
And
I think it was Brower at the Capitol Center.
Bulldog Brower.
Bulldog Brower, his titties hung down to his belly at that point. He was over the hill. I guess the old man had a heart spot in his heart for him because he did not belong in any kind of main events. But it was like, all right, it's wrestling. We're going to go. We'll go see Backlund against Brower.
Do you remember what year that was?
79.
Okay. Because
they wrestled at the Capitol Center July 28th. And then it was a 6-man, the 3 Valiants against Andre, DiBiase, and Travis. It's like, oh my God. But it's wrestling, so we went.
Yeah, I mean, let me see if I can find that real quick because I found July of 79 is what you said?
July 28th of 79. Because I tell you, even Backlund in his book, he's like, I don't know. He said, it's the worst match I ever had in my life, wrestling Brower. And he said, I didn't like the man's politics. He said, and I don't think he respected me. He was a little stiff, but it was like, I don't know what the hell I could do with him. I couldn't wait to get the match over. It was horrible.
I mean, you really get into, in your book, the feeling of being a fan and the feeling of the anticipation, the lulls, the tension that I said that my friend in college, a non-wrestling fan, he was picking up on it, the lulls, the tension, the anticipation. And when you're watching the weekly shows and you're getting excited for that house show, that's what it was real. The realness was the fans' adoration of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I do still think, I found it, buddy. I finally found it. And I don't, of all the things I marked off in the book, there's the one thing I wanted to quote. Here we go. Let's see. The Capitol Center hosted a show on July 28th. I went with some friends, even though Backlund was defending his belt against Brower. It didn't take a brain surgeon to guess what was going to happen, but it was wrestling, and that's why I went.
Yes. Oh, yes. We still went.
And I think, I mean,
I wasn't driving, and I had to convince this friend that he's like, oh, Brower. I said, come on, let's go. Because there was a January of that year of 79. I think it was the 28th. And it wasn't, Backlund wasn't even on the card. It was a tag team main event. But the night before, there was Elvis impersonators. I said, I'll go with you to the Elvis impersonation if we can go to wrestling the next night. So we did it. And it was like, oh, my God. You talk about a lunatic asylum. They left the gates open. Holy shit. Unbelievable.
To answer a lot, and I'm going to give credit here to our third silent member of the team. I'm not sure if Adam's still with us from Florida, but Adam, I appreciate it. Benny Scala checked in. Any of the guys that were watching, if there was any women, I'm really happy. Thank you. But Laza also did a nice job of sharing this video in some of the. I've actually been kicked off Facebook. If any of the angry wrestling fans are still around. The angry wrestling fan, my persona, was kicked off Facebook, so I'm not allowed to be on there. But Laza is holding the torch for the Foreign Object Wrestling group and some other groups. He had a thing about the sheep herders. The sheep herders are Kiwi, New Zealand, close cousins to Aussies. They call Kiwis and Aussies. Oh, that's very interesting. So getting some life lessons here from our buddy Laza. The sheep herders are Kiwi from New Zealand, close cousins to Aussies from Australia. They call Kiwis and Aussies Anzacs because of World War I, where we served together. That's pretty cool. I like that.
Very neat.
And what was I going to say here, buddy? Yeah, I mean, I just that's what God, not to piss on Vince Jr. too much, but when he did complain about the smoke-filled arenas, I mean, to me, that's what I loved about wrestling. Like that was the fun of it. And so
grassroots wrestling, man. That was
Yeah.
it. And you tell people that smoke-filled is like, what do you mean smoke-filled? Yeah, people smoked in the arenas back then. You could do that. And you left choking and you smelled like you were fighting an 8-alarm fire, but yeah, people were in there smoking.
I think by the time I came around, from my memory, Nikita, you could smoke on the concourse, but not in the seats. That was the compromise. So at the Capitol Center, I mean, I remember that specifically for the Washington Capitals hockey games.
Well, yeah, they were trying to preserve because that was a newer building. Yeah, that made sense.
Yeah. So when you walk, it was like being in a casino. Like when you're walking through, it's a big smoke, but when you get to your seats, no smoking. So, I think that's I mean, I'm a non-smoker, but I mean, I think that was a compromise. And did want to answer his question. Laza asked about Eddie Guerrero wrestling the New Japan Super Cup as Black Tiger. I think you're correct. I think Eddie Guerrero was the Black Tiger, and I think Benoit did wrestle under a mask as well. And this is true. This has been said a million times. Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura have given credit to superstar Billy Graham. I think just what I was getting at is the territorial pissings, the different promoters within the WWF having a say in the matches in their venue. That's totally different than even going back to the mid 80s when you'd have the same, Roddy Piper versus the Tonga Kid is going to be the main event for the whole town, or Hulk Hogan defending the title against Big John Studd. You're going to see that for the next 2 or 3 months. You know what I mean? So I just feel like that era of 1970s Worldwide Wrestling Federation, that was lost on me. That change was a part of this, and I guess the word is looseness, if that makes any sense. The Wild West.
I like that name, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. That was better. They changed it right around the spring of '79, and I don't know why, but they did.
I always thought it was a thing where I think of the '70s, like the show. There was a show called Wide World of Sports.
Wait a minute, I take that back, because Willie Gilzenberg died around December of '78. So then Hisashi Shima was the new president from Japan. So I think they made some kind of money agreement. This is what we're going to call it. And then it's like the thing with Backlund and Inoki that we did not know happened on November 30th of '79. And we'll talk about it the next time, because that was a nice, where nobody knew what the hell was happening, but Japan was there simulcasting. They had a different scenario than people watching it live in New York, and it's like it just all gelled together, but nobody knew what it was like. Dealing from the bottom of the deck, you just kept playing the hand. It worked. It was perfect.
Let me play your pictures one more time. Nikita Breznikov. By all means, folks, if you've been with us through this interview, pick up his book.
Thank you for sticking around.
Yeah, well, seriously, I mean, I've enjoyed it. But Crowbar Press. This is the best way to get the book. I think Laza has the ebook, which is available on Amazon. That's fine too. But I think I'm not sure if the photographs carry over. But
no,
for me, like
they absolutely do not. We verify that they do not.
Okay, so in the print version, you have all these wonderful photographs.
The clippings, the newspaper clippings too. Yes. Yeah, that was big in those days.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, like I said, buddy, this was an interactive experience. The year 2024. And in some ways, it made me. I've toyed around with the idea of writing my memoirs of a wrestling fan for years. And between your book and John Hitchcock's book, those are really the templates of what I would try to do. So I mean, this book is kind of an inspiring read. And like I said, I had so much fun. Like I'd read about an angle, like the Peter Maivia stuff was totally escape from me. So reading your book and then watching the video was great. Let's show these photographs again. The music is by Tony Caramadre in Warwick, Rhode Island, Fat Tone Studio. And Nikita, we'll wrap it up now, but any final words for everybody?
Thank you for all your support. And it's been a good run being co-wrestling fans in the family of pro wrestling.
And once again, that's Nikita's book is available on Crowbar Press. Shout out to SCOTT TEAL and the good people over there. Go ahead.
And I'm on Cameo. If you want me to send out, it's not that expensive. If you want me to send out happy birthday, go to hell, or whatever, just you contact Cameo and I'll do a little video for you.
Yeah, Nick, our buddy there, Laza from Australia, has done a bunch of cameos. He's done had me cameo him 2 or 3 times. I appreciate it, Laza. And Nikita could probably give you some good insight. That's my book, which is on Amazon, and Nikita's book, which is on Crowbar Press. So for my buddy Nikita Breznikov, Benny Scala checked in, Laza from Australia, Adam from Florida, and everybody else who watched, thank you so much.
That's for doing, you guys.